Okay, so welcome everybody. We're really happy to have you here in Pisa for this meeting. We are quite numerous and there are more people, not more people, many other people following us from home. It's a hybrid conference and we're happy about that. We're really happy about this meeting. We decided to organize it in Pisa, also because it's a region that it now has 3 hornet species. So velutina coming from the north, orientalis coming from the south, and our native Vespa cabro. So it's a meeting point for them, and in a way also a meeting point for us. This meeting, we think that it has 3 goals mainly. First of all, is the meeting of the Vespid task force of the COLOSS Association. Laura is going to talk about that, which means that we are here to share our updates on hornet invasion all around Europe and maybe also all around the globe, because some people from the States should join us tomorrow online, clearly. The second goal is to raise awareness about these hornets invasions. That's why we, contrary to other meetings from the COLOSS task force, we include students, beekeepers, we open to everybody this meeting. And the third point is that we really think that we have to unite and integrate our forces, our efforts. And it might sound a little bit weird, but 20 years after the first report of velutina in Europe, we're still trying to do that. Many things happened, many nice things, some not bad, but not so effective things happened. We should work together in a better way. So these are the 3 goals of the meeting. And I have a couple of housekeeping things. So coffee break is going to be outside. You have toilets left, or on the right there. For the social dinner and the field trip, I guess you're already confirmed at the entrance. If not, please do that. We have to give the exact numbers tonight. Field trip depends on the weather. So we have plan A and plan B. Let's see which one we're gonna do. And for the speakers, please come here and upload your talk if you can before tomorrow, otherwise early in the morning, tomorrow morning. Tomorrow we're gonna have a very packed day. We have about 20 talks, some in presence, some online, 1 pre-recorded talk. So please stay within the time you have for your talk and upload the presentation if you can before. So things will be smoother. And from remote, please keep your microphone off and also your camera off unless you want to make a question at the end of the talk. Okay, so what else? Important. Have to acknowledge the support from some institutions which supported us, especially financially. So the coffee breaks, the social dinner, the field trip, they're paid by University of Pisa, COLOSS Association, and CREA. So really, thanks to them. And thanks to all the organizers here, which helped me in the organization. And I guess it's time to start. I leave the word to Massimo Dal Monte. Professor Massimo Dal Monte is the head of Department of Biology department. Stage is yours.
So thank you, Alessandro. I am here to bring you the greetings of my department. I am a physiologist, so the Vespid are outside my skills. But I was fascinating in reading the program and the abstract of your talks. So far, I thought there is a honeybee that is good and hornet that is bad. My son is allergic to hornet poison, so when I see hornets, I try to kill them. And so far, everything was simple, action and reaction. And now I learned that there isn't hornet, but hornets are a word. Vespa velutina, Vespa germanica, Vespa tropica, Vespa orientalis, and so on. So many hornets. And I think that starting from today, I will ask for identity cards before to crash hornets. But since I think that learning new things is part of the spice of life, I am happy that Alessandro gave me an invitation to participate to this opening ceremony. So I renew the greetings of my department to all of you, and I thank you to giving me the opportunity to be a person better informed about hornets. So thank you, and good work for this 3-day meeting.
Thanks, Massimo. The head of Department of Veterinary Science is coming, I guess. So maybe Laura, you can talk about the COLOSS activity and Vespid task force while we're waiting for him. As you prefer. Actually, the camera is pointing here, so people will.
Okay, thank you. Welcome. I want to welcome all of you on behalf of COLOSS. Probably all of you know what is it?
My fault.
No problem. What is COLOSS, but especially for young people, there are a lot of students. I want to invite them to join this group because this is an international association working on honeybee health. So for all the students who work on bees, but also on wasps, it's really an interesting opportunity to share knowledge. And regarding the COLOSS Vespid task force, I'm one of the 3 co-chair together with Alessandro and Sandra. And this task force was formerly the Velutina task force, but we decided to enlarge, to broaden its focus on all Vespids because there are other species now that are dangerous for bees or are becoming alien or invasive. So we thought that it was interesting to study more species than Velutina. And of course, Velutina remain the main focus of the working group and is somehow also an example of how to manage an invasive species. You see here the objective of the task force, so to monitor the spread of Vespa velutina, and here there are many talks from many European, but also from other countries. So I think it will be very interesting to see how it's moving all over the world, and to assess impacts, study the biology, the ethology, and develop monitoring and control methods. So a session is dedicated to this. I think it will be really a rich and interesting meeting, and I want really to thank especially the colleagues from the University of Pisa and Florence for their huge effort in organizing this meeting, and of course COLOSS for sustaining this meeting, and all of you for your participation. That's all. I don't know if Sandra wants to add something.
No, I think welcome, and I hope we all are going to learn and enjoy this meeting. We have a lot to talk about.
Thanks.
Okay, so now is the turn of Professor Antonio Felicioli from the Veterinary Science Department.
Thank you, Alessandro. I'm not so tall, so need to make this. And you are all welcome, and I'm very happy to have all of you here in Pisa, and hope you're enjoying your time here. I apologize for the absence of my director, but he will come in a few minutes. I phoned him, so he will he promised me that he will be here in a few minutes. So we will see if it's true or not. And Professor Francesco di Iacovo. I can say you something about the day of Wednesday when we are just planned a field trip, and we hope if the weather will help us, but also if not help us, because I think that humans are not soluble in water, so maybe we can do something at the same time. We hope to destroy. Oh, here is my director, the director of veterinary science department. So we hope to inactivate active velutina nest. Is quite high, so we will use all the bars in order to spray permethrin, and we hope to use also the radio telemetry as well. We can see some individuals with deformed wings. So this is the program, and we will try to adjust it if will go to rain in order to make something in a quite big room. Okay, so Professor Francesco Di Iacovo, please, you can say a few words.
Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry for my little delay, but for sure you already started very well your activity. It's a pleasure to be here. From the side of the Department of Veterinary Science to welcome you all in this interesting meeting. Just two comments. We know that we are experiencing a huge environmental challenges, and we know also that bees are generating greater interest, larger interest on the aspect related to monitoring, to evaluate, and to improve the environmental situation in many contexts, also related to food production and so on. So from this point of view, there are a lot of aspects that can be, let me say, cultivated. Because there is a lot in terms of citizen science related to this topic, and of course also in monitoring velutina. I think that this is a good aspect that I should take into consideration. There is a lot of action research that should be done in order to better link science practitioners and all the people that is involved in this kind of aspect in terms of stakeholders, public and private. So from this point of view, I already know that Antonio is pushing in my department many activities, and is very welcome. And I'm sure that this activity that you will face during this meeting will bring our department into a very interesting part of the actual research. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your work. Thank you, Antonio, and thank you also to Massimo for the collaboration between us, our departments in this topic. Have a good work. Bye.
Thank you very much. So I guess we can start with this afternoon dedicated to the 20 years from the arrival of Vespa velutina. And our first speaker is Elena Tricarico. She's working in Florence, and she's an expert on biological invasion, mostly in freshwater ecosystems, but her experience span on a wide range of taxa. And we asked her to come here and to introduce to us the topic of biological invasions, focusing especially on the regulation at the European level and the need of the integration between different countries, which, as I was telling you before, is something that is still missing, in my opinion, at least, in the field of the fight against these biological invasions of hornet, especially velutina. So I hope that Elena will provide us with some interesting insights. And thank you very much, Elena, for accepting this invitation.
Okay, good afternoon. Sorry, I'm not tall as Alessandro as well. Thanks a lot for the nice invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here. I also decided to jump on the terrestrial part, but because the regulation is quite interesting, especially for invertebrates and insects. And I think the cover I selected well fits the aim of this meeting. So we should collaborate and cooperate, and we should strengthen our relationship in order to tackle and mitigate the biological invasions. I know we all already know that when we talk about alien species, we talk about animal, plants, oh, sorry, spoiler, and other organisms that have been introduced outside the native range by humans, so accidentally or voluntarily. And we know that a subset of these introduced species can become problematic, exerting ecological impacts, as well as economic, but also impacts, as well as on our health and our, daily life. We know that invasive alien species are considered one of the 5 main aims, threats, sorry, affecting the biodiversity loss. So we have the invasion in biological invasions together with climate change, habitat fragmentation, overexploitation, and pollution. And so considering the increasing threat posed by the invasive alien species, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services decided 4 years ago to launch the worldwide assessment on this topic. And I had the honor to participate to this assessment, and the final report has been launched almost 2 months ago in Bonn, Germany. I have put here the link to the media release and other materials you can freely download from the website. So everything is available on that website, and it's written in a very plain language, just for stakeholders, for common people, because we know that this problem is caused by our behavior, and so we need all the people together to face this problem. So I will present some data from this last report, just to provide you an updated picture of the situation at worldwide level, and then I will focus on Europe as well. So when looking at the data presented 2 months ago at the launch of the report, we have found that we have 37,000 or even more established alien species that have been introduced by human activities worldwide. And we can, rate about 200 new alien species every year. And this can provide you an idea of the stress on our ecosystem, as well as on our activities, economic activities, and human health. We know that at least 3,500 alien species have negative impacts on nature and also on people, so on good quality of life of people. And if we look at the identity of these invasive alien species, you can see that plants, together with insects, invertebrates I say, but insects are quite relevant, cover the majority of the bunch of this group. So it's also true that plants and insects are also quite numerous at worldwide level, but it's important to notice that invertebrates, specifically insects, are important when we talk about biological invasions. And it's a global threat. So as Alessandro mentioned before, even if, for example, for Vespa velutina, the first report dated back to 20 years ago, we are still here trying to push all the people together, because the species do not know the boundaries, the political boundaries. So they are introduced by humans, they can spread, and then they can cause problems. So we should collaborate all together. And if we look at the impacts reported for the different areas of the world, you can see that Americas, followed by Europe and Central Asia, are quite affected by biological invasions. And even some areas that we considered, maybe we have considered preserved by this phenomenon are not intact. I mean, they are affected as well, like protected areas, but also Antarctica. And so they are everywhere because we are moving everywhere and we are accidentally moved a lot of species. Looking at the impacts, there are at least 75% of negative impacts reported from the terrestrial realms, especially in temperate areas and forests. I don't know if you are able to see the peak, but if you look at Europe, you can see this lovely purple color. Maybe Federico will be very happy because he loves the purple color. But the purple color means that we have at least more than 80,000 established alien terrestrial and freshwater species in our continent. And also, if you look at another color between blue and green, I would say for the marine environment, you can see that again for Europe, we have the darkest color, meaning that we have also a lot of established marine species in the Mediterranean. Because of the Suez Canal, you know, Suez Canal is a sort of highway from the Red Sea and the Pacific, and then the Indian Ocean, sorry. When we look at the effects of these invasive alien species, these are the numbers coming out from the report. So we talk about the 60% of global extinction that have been caused solely or alongside with other drivers by invasive alien species. So this is a quite huge numbers. 16 of global extinction have been caused unique by invasive alien species, especially on islands and especially in freshwater ecosystem, because we know that these ecosystems are quite vulnerable to invasion, biological invasion, sorry. And when we look local extinctions, we have also more than 1,200 documented local extinction of native species, again, mainly on islands and aquatic environments. And 85% of the documented impacts on nature are negative. There is now a debate in the community of people working on invasion biology, if considering also the positive effects of the species. So there is a huge debate about this. But for the moment, I think when these are the numbers claiming for a huge negative impact from the species. But the fact is, despite these numbers, we also found that the current policies are insufficient in trying to tackle this problem. And we have seen that although most countries, around 80%, have targets for the management of biological invasions, 83% of countries, we are talking at worldwide level, do not have national legislation or regulation tackling this problem. So this is quite an alarm. Okay, we recognize there is a problem, it's an increasing problem, but we don't have the instruments to fight. And almost half of the countries, so 45%, do not invest in the management of invasive alien species. We know this is a quite common problem also for conservation biology, so we are on the same boat with the conservation of native species, but it's quite worrying also because considering the impacts caused by invasive alien species, that almost half of the countries at worldwide level are not doing anything to fight this problem. And this, I mean, leads to an increase in the numbers of species introduced. You can see, I hope you can appreciate from the different peaks the similar trends for the different taxonomic group. There is a huge increase in the numbers of introduced species. If you look especially at invertebrates, so insects, crustaceans, mollusks, you can see the steep increase. Europe is in purple, or it should be purple. I don't know how do you see it, but anyway, and this testifies the important threat caused by these species in Europe, and they are still continuously introduced it seems there is no saturation. There is a famous article published in Nature like 6 years ago about this problem. It seems there is no saturation in the introduction of invasive alien species. So it's an increasing threat. We recognize the threats, but we don't have always the instruments to fight it. And one, issue that we should never forget are the economic costs caused by this species. They are quite relevant. For many years, we were debating about how it could cost at a different level, at different areas. Some colleagues decided to promote an international project about economic impacts caused by invasive alien species, and these are the first results they obtained. These are not the precise numbers, because obviously this is an underestimation of the real economic costs, but you can have an idea. So at worldwide level, these are the $1 billion caused by invasive alien species for the economic cost. And if you look at Europe, also the economic costs are quite relevant. But if we look at the different taxonomic groups responsible for this costs, okay, I think this is no. Okay, sorry. Okay, if you look, sorry, I was looking for the pointer. And then if you, just in a minute, look at the figure with the different taxonomic groups, maybe you remember that invertebrates were the most important. Okay, so invertebrates. Okay, so invertebrates, you can see invertebrates. And if you look among the invertebrates, insects. So again, this is another proof that invertebrates are quite important and can exert also relevant economic costs at worldwide level. But when we talk about impacts, recently we talk also about native species that can spread unaided by humans, but moved, for example, by climate change or by better conditions, like the case of Vespa orientalis in Italy. And in this case, these native species that are not moved by humans are not considered alien, but they are called neonative, according to this recent article published by excellent authors. This term, they propose this term, but not all the people like this term, but they try to disentangle the confusion among the different aspects. So when we talk about native species moved by climate change and not by humans, we cannot talk about alien species, but we talk about neonative. But why I'm just precising this aspect? Because this is important from the legislative point of view. Because if they are alien in Europe, we follow a certain legislation. If they are not alien, but they are neonative, there are other legislation we should follow. So just a brief parenthesis about this. I know you will hear about these neonative species tomorrow in some talks. We know that we have several goals to protect our biodiversity. And also at the last COP15 in December 2022, the governments adopted this framework. And the target 6 is completely devoted to invasive alien species. And as pointed out, they stressed the importance to identify and manage the pathways of these species to prevent the introduction and establishment of our priority invasive alien species, and try to reduce the rates of introduction and manage the species already existing on the territories. This target is very similar to a previous target of the worldwide biodiversity strategy for 2020. So they are just stressing again the fact that we are still late and we still need to fight this problem, and they reiterate the need to take actions. Also at European level, we have the European Biodiversity Strategy for 2030, and the key commitment 9 is completely devoted to invasive alien species. And here the key commitment 9 states that there should be a 50 reduction in the number of red list species threatened by invasive alien species. So they try to set a more clear goal, because in the previous strategies they just say we should try to reduce the rate of introduction without any clear goals. So now they try to define a clear goal. So, but how can we try, or we should, how can we try to reach this goal listed at worldwide level and European level? We know since 2002 that the hierarchical approach has been recommended to tackle biological invasions. There are 3 steps: prevention, the most important, so avoid new introductions; early detection, rapid response, and when we talk about rapid response, it should be very rapid. According to the EU regulation, we are talking about 3 months. And the last step is the control, the management of widespread species and the mitigation of their impacts. So prevention is considered the most important step. Why? Because it's less costly, and because we know that it's quite hard to manage species once they arrived and established in an area. There is a recent paper by Cuthbert and co-authors published in 2021. They found that there are huge costs related to the management for biological invasion at worldwide level. These are the numbers, as you can see here. But when they look at the pre-invasion management and the post-invasion management, they found that the pre-invasion management spending is 25 times lower than post-invasion, meaning that usually governments or the competent authorities invest less money in the prevention. I think it's a human fact. We always wait to see the problems before deciding to act. And they found that the management costs were skewed towards North America and Oceania. And they found that proactive management could reduce future costs at the trillion scale. So if we decided to take a proactive approach, and so to invest a lot in prevention, we can save a lot of money. And here in the graph, they represented on the left in blue the most costly species for pre-invasion management, and in pink, the most costly species for the post-invasion management. And the arrows indicate the different invertebrates. So you can see here there are 4 invertebrates out of 10, and here we have 8 invertebrates out of 10. So you can see there is a quite huge difference between the pre-invasion management and the post-invasion management. Even for the same species, like, for example, Cerathisis capitata, meaning that they invest few money for the pre-invasion management, waiting for the appearance of the problem. When the problem is quite relevant, they had to invest a lot of money, especially for invertebrates, because many invertebrates, mainly insects, are phytopathogens, so they exert a lot of economic impacts. And so at the agricultural level, the forestry, and so we know that there are many activities undergoing to tackle the species. So the message from this paper is, okay, we spend a lot of money in management, but we should devote more money on the pre-invasion phase, unless waiting until the appearance of the problem. And talking about prevention and the investment towards, this problem, I would like to talk about the European Regulation on Invasive Alien Species. Maybe most of you know the regulation, but I think it's quite important to remind some key points because Vespa velutina is linked to this regulation. And it was the unique insect for many years, because the list that we talk about in a few minutes is continuously updated, but Vespa velutina appeared immediately on the first version of the list linked to the EU regulation. So in the past, there was a lot of debate about this, how to fight invasive alien species. For many years, people talk about a strategy, but they realized that the strategy against invasive alien species would have not been so effective. So they decided to shift towards a regulation, because regulation is mandatory. So you have to do what the regulation claim reports. And at the end, after some years of consultations, also within the member states, the regulation was drafted. It came out in 2014, and it entered into force the 1st January 2015 in every member state. The hierarchical approach is guiding the regulation. So you can find the 3 steps I mentioned before, with prevention being the most important step. And the core of this regulation is the list of invasive alien species of union concern. I will come back about this list in a few minutes. There is also the control of pathways, common data support mechanisms, and also the regulation underlines the need to increase awareness about this problem. There are several obligations. So I mentioned before that the core of the regulation is this list. If a species is on the list, everything is forbidden. You cannot reproduce, grow, transport, buy, sell. You cannot do anything with the species. There are derogations, but anyway, when the species appears on the list, it's banned. The other obligations are about pathways, as I mentioned before. So member states should take action on pathways of an unintentional introduction, so stressing the importance of prevention. They should establish a surveillance system that collects and reports data on these species listed in the list, sorry for the repetition. They should take measures for early detection and rapid eradication, and they should manage the species that are already in an area. The member states should report about the situation of these alien species on the list and their management every 6 years. The first reporting was in 2019, but there is another important article in the regulation, that the Article 22, about cooperation and coordination among member states, sharing the same marine region or the same biogeographical region or borders or river basins. So the regulation underlines the importance of collaboration and cooperation. So I have mentioned that the core of the list is, the core of the regulation, sorry, is the list. But how a species can enter into this list? There are some criteria to follow. First, the species should be alien to the entire territory of the European Union, should be able to establish and spread at least in one biogeographic region, should have documented or potential significant negative impacts on biodiversity. The species may also have economic and impacts on human health, but the ecological impacts are crucial. If a species doesn't have any reported potential or documented ecological impacts, cannot be a candidate for the list. So the new aspect of the regulation is the importance provided to the environment. So the ecological impacts are crucial. And these impacts are assessed through a tool called the risk assessment, and the risk assessment are mandatory. So we should not candidate a species without conducting risk assessment. It's a long process. Risk assessment is a tool allowing to assess the invasiveness of a species. And it's important that the species, once in the list, could be more effectively managed. So sometimes some species are not appearing in the list because their management is very difficult. For example, marine species. If you look at the list, at the moment there is one, another one is entering, marine species, because once the species on the list, you have to manage. But how can you manage a marine species? It's very difficult, but it's mandatory once the species is on the list. So this is a political discussion about member states, how many marine species can be included in the list. The list is dynamic, meaning that there are continuous updates. The first version came out in 2016, and there were only 37 species. There was a huge debate about the scientific community. Well, what about 37 species? Only 37. Why only 37, considering the huge amount of invasive species we have in Europe? Because to be on the list, they should follow the criteria I mentioned before. Risk assessment is quite important. And so there are obligations to follow to candidate the species on the list. But luckily, as I mentioned before, this list is can be continuously updated. The last version, updated to last year, comprises 88 invasive alien species, 47 animal species, and 41 plant species. And if we look at the invertebrates, there are 14 invertebrates, 1 flatworm, 1 mollusk, 7 crustaceans. I'm sorry, but I didn't bias this list, even if I'm working on crayfish and crustaceans. And 5 insects, so far 4 ants and 1 hornet. And as I mentioned before, Vespa velutina immediately appeared on the first version of the list. And this underlines the importance of this species. The impacts these species can cause were recognized to be relevant, and so they decided to put on the list immediately. This is the peak coming from the first reporting. If you look at this map, maybe you can start laughing because it's quite old compared to the situation I'm sure you will talk about tomorrow. But this is the first official reporting. So we are waiting for the next reporting in 2025, and I'm pretty sure that the peak will change dramatically. And this is just to provide you an idea of the results the member states provided to the European Commission for the first reporting. I selected Italy as a case study because I know better. But this is the first reporting from Italy in 2019. On the left, on your left, you can see the number of species of union concern considering the different regions. And on the right, you can see the different squares for the reporting, and so the different distribution of the species. And when we look at the management action the different regions in Italy are conducting on the different species on the list, there is a quite interesting picture. Sorry, I'm laughing because there is still a lot of work to do. Okay, on the upper part of this graph, there are animals. The animals at that time, the list was composed by 48 species. So these were the animals, and these were the plants. If you look at the red parts, these are the regions doing some management. If you look at the gray parts, these are the regions where the species are present. They are not doing any management activities. Okay, so for the invertebrates, it's not worse as for plants, because these are plants, and you can see that not many regions are doing management activities on plants. So very few regions are conducting some controlling activities. If we look at the animals, we can see there are management activities on the red swan crayfish here, because this is a quite widespread species in Italy. Then we have another crayfish here. Then here, the situation for the Asian hornet. You can see half of the region at that time were doing something, half of the other regions were not doing anything. Obviously, this picture is completely different now, but just to provide you an idea of the efforts the regions were doing at that time. And then we have another crayfish here. So there are species also that at that time the regions didn't manage. For example, this is the marble crayfish, a parthenogenetic species, and no regions did anything about the species. So the efforts are quite diverse according to the different species. And I hope to see more red part on the next reporting. Maybe I'm too optimistic, but I want to have hope in more management about the species of Union list. And we have also in Italy the management plan at national level for the different species in the Union list. They are in Italian, so I just put the cover of these management plans regarding invertebrates. This is for Asian hornet. This is the red swan crayfish and the marble crayfish. But if you look at the dates, you can see that the Asian hornet was approved in 2022 and the crayfish in 2023. Why so late? Because the plans were drafted, and then there is another mandatory step, that there is the consultation within the regions and between regions and the ministry. And so after the consultation, maybe something can be changed in the plan, and then after the plan is approved by everyone, it can be officially approved with a decree by the ministry. So the procedure is quite long. And there are also other management plans for other species. So you can have an idea that even if the regulation entered into force in 2015, this management plan was approved in 2022. But trust me, this delay was nothing compared to other regulation or legislation we implemented in Italy. So I could be quite satisfied, even if we can do better. And what about the other invertebrates? Because we have seen from the worldwide situation and the European situation that there are many invasive alien species, and the invertebrates are quite relevant. There are species with no ecological impacts, or at the moment, no reported ecological impacts. So they cannot be candidated for the Union list. There are species quite important, but they are partially European, so they cannot be candidated for the Union list, but they can be candidated for regional and national list, and the regulation foresees regional and national list. One of the main examples is coming from freshwater, is, for example, the zebra mussel is native to Ponto-Caspian area, but cannot be included in the Union list because it's partially European, but can be included in our national list or in national list of other European countries. And many other species are covered by other legislation or guidelines. For example, mosquitoes. We have heard a lot about dengue here in Italy, an increase of cases of dengue this summer, and the alien mosquito fish are a good vector of these diseases. But this is related to human health, so they are following another path. And many other insects are regulated by the phytosanitary sector. So because we know that many invertebrates, especially insects, are a real pest for agriculture and forestry. And since 2000, there are regulations about phytosanitary sector taking into account this problem. And so in these cases, these species are following another path. So they are regulated by the phytosanitary sector and cannot be regulated by the EU regulation. So it's quite tricky, but it's important to remind the different competencies and the different sectors. And this has been done also to avoid overlapping and repetition in the efforts to tackle the different species. Last but not least, please remember that, as I mentioned before, the list is alive. So there are risk assessments ongoing on other species on different steps, because the procedure is quite long. So in the future, there will appear more invertebrates on the list. But it's important that the process is followed, because once the species are in the list, everything is forbidden. Please remember this. One crucial point is trade. If the species are on the list, the trade is forbidden. This is important, because if the World Trade Organization comes to Europe asking why the species is on the list, we should provide robust evidence of the listing of the species. So to sum up, the EU regulation is quite important, but it's not sufficient. We have seen there are other regulations and other guidelines to tackle invertebrates and insects. Biological invasion are due to our behavior, because humans move species, accidentally or voluntarily, and we need to change in some way our behavior. As Alessandro mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we need to strengthen the relationship. We need to provide clear information. We need to foster collaboration and increase the awareness and involve the different stakeholders in order to prevent new introduction and mitigate the impacts of the ongoing ones. This infographic is coming again from the worldwide report provided by the IPES 2 months ago. And you can see that the roots of this figure, the brown part, is robust institution, robust legislation, but then the branches and the leaves are composed by collaboration and cooperation among people and among the different sectors. So everything is interlinked. So we need to remember that we can have an effective legislation, but legislation would not be enough. We need to go behind the legislation and strengthen our cooperation, because legislation cannot cover everything. And we know that citizen science can help tackling biological invasion, and now it's quite popular to have apps on our mobile phone, take a picture and send to repository in order to provide updates and new reports about certain species. But please remember that rapid communication of first reports to competent authority are necessary. Because if we don't communicate rapidly the new reports, the competent authorities cannot take proactive management. They cannot try to stop the process of invasion at the beginning, but just they see what's happening after. So the widespread, the spread of the species, a lot of damages. And in this case, we know that it should be quite costly and sometimes not always effective. So we all can do our parts, but we need also to communicate with the competent authorities and realize that we need to fight this problem and we need to be proactive. And thanks a lot for your attention. I decided to put this infographic coming from another project financed at European level about communication and understanding of invasion biology in Europe. And here you can see the link. Again, you can find materials and documents, videos. You are allowed to download everything because everything is free. And this is coming from the same projects of the peak I showed at the beginning. So the strength, the effort, the collaboration should be the core of tackling invasion biology, not only in Europe, but worldwide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elena. It's been really a nice, wide overview, and you made some important points. I guess it was exactly what we needed for the opening of this meeting. So we have time for a few questions. We have several minutes. Wait, I make the tool.
Thank you. Thank you, Elena, for the talk. I mean, it was a very good talk. Concerning your last slide, with the phone, emails, and all sorts of communications, and you said it is important to rapidly communicate on an invasion, but it is already the case. I mean, but the point is not to communicate very quickly. Is there somebody listening to this communication? And this is the point, because I mean, for example, for Vespa velutina, it was noticed very early, about 1 year after the introduction, and nobody listened. Depends where. But for example, nationally in France, nobody listened, clearly. In Europe, nobody listened. So it was very local listening. And yeah, I will talk about that in my talk in the end of the afternoon. But during almost 3-4 years, nothing happens. Almost nothing happens. I should say almost nothing.
Yeah, I have to say that I have an optimistic character. So I want to see always the empty, the full, the half full glass. Anyway, you are completely right. It happened the same here in Italy with the blue crab, the Calinette sapidus. I know if you have read the news this summer, it was like, this species is coming, destroying our aquaculture, our fisheries, and so on. But the species appeared in, oh, sorry. This was my comment. At the beginning of the 90s. So, and when the scientists pointed out the possible problem, nobody listened. It's true that it's not so easy, that sometimes the competent authority don't take into account our messages and the reports. But we should not be discouraged by this. And I have to say that I'm quite stubborn. So I want to, yes, continue to, it's important not to miss the point and try to press the competent authorities, or at least try to press them. In some cases, it worked, and also in others not, and that is true. I have to recognize your comment, to acknowledge, sorry, your comment is true. But sometimes we should not forget that in certain cases, there could be the key messages trying to move the competent authorities. Sometimes works, sometimes less. This is why my colleagues, other colleagues are working on the economic impacts, because they know that providing some impacts could be important in trying to push the competent authorities. I'm not saying that it's the silver bullet, but it could help in pressing them. But yes, it could be difficult. I agree.
Thanks. There's another question here. Just I remind for the people which are following online, you can put ask questions on the chat, or you can raise your hand. There's already one question. I'm going to take it later.
Thank you. Yes, I was wondering about that too, but I'm more of like a person who thinks about solutions. And I was wondering how you feel about the fact that we have institutions for a long time already. Veterinarian institution, phytopathology is institutionalized. Biological invasion is quite a new, but actually quite well-developed science at this point, and also might, as a policy, is more developed now than, let's say, 20 years ago. So should this also be institutionalized, or should it be an umbrella for these other institutions in terms of policy? How do you feel about that?
Okay, thanks a lot. This is a quite interesting question. There is a discussion for this point about human health that is covered by different institutions, different regulation, and it's linked also to biological invasion. So they are trying to create a sort of an umbrella in order to involve all the different sectors and institutions. And yes, you are right. We should, for example, when I'm thinking about Italy, but I'm pretty sure that the situation should be similar in other countries. The regions are in charge of managing the species, so they are very happy because the problem is the funds. The problem are the funds to manage the species. And the ministry encourages the region to use the already existing networks and institutions in order to monitor the species and to cooperate together, in order not to reinvent the wheel. I know I'm just reporting what's happening, but yes, it should be a more coordinated effort between the different sectors, because sometimes we use also different languages for indicating the same things. So yeah, I agree. We should coordinate better, and for the human health, because this is a quite hot topic, especially after COVID, because pandemic, the COVID is considered, the virus is considered a sort of biological invasions, and it perfectly fits what happened in biological invasion. So prevention should have been the best step, but we know how it worked. And yes, it would be necessary to have more harmonization and integration. Yeah, I agree.
Thanks. We have a question from home while you're thinking the next one. From Pete Kennedy. He's saying, thank you for a brilliant talk. There are huge differences in the amount of resources different countries and regions make available for the management of invasive alien species. The EU made the decision for MS, I don't know what does it mean, stands for, to manage this out of their own budgets. Given the European impact of invasive alien species, was this a big mistake? Member state, thanks, Pete.
Member state, yeah. Okay, this is the
big mistake or not to take out the budget for the EU.
There is again a debate about this, because it's true, because when they drafted the regulation, they do not precise the finances needed for managing the species. If you read the regulation, they talk about the principle who pollutes pays, but we know how difficult it is sometimes. And they indicate some programs like live programs for managing invasive alien species, but we know that live programs are fantastic, but they're very competitive, and they are not forever. We know that usually one of the main task is to maintain the results of a live project after the end of the live project. So yeah, there should have been a financial instruments dedicated to this, also because they, at the end, every member state should do the work in a different way. For example, so in Italy, they ask it to the regions, okay, you can use your existing network, and we can use the fees coming from the laws, because there are, obviously, if you don't respect what the regulations requires, there are fees. So we can use the fees for managing invasive alien species, but they are not enough. So this is a very weak point, and we all recognize that it was quite debated. If I may say, I'm not saying that the EU regulation is perfect. There are many points that can be improved. The marine one is another one. For example, there is no mention about ballast waters, or EU regulation. They are quite important for marine species. But at least we have a regulation after many years of discussion. It's not perfect. I know that there are still improvements, and they are working to also better precise certain aspects of the regulation, because in some cases, in some points, the regulation is not completely clear also in the application. So it's not perfect, but at least we have tried to do something.
Thanks. So you saw an improvement over the last 20 years, you're saying, in a way, or not?
Yeah, okay. If I have to follow my spirit, yes, but I'm realistic, and I know that for certain aspects, yes, for the other, not.
Okay.
So But I do have hope to more improvements. At least we talk more about the problems than in the past. And especially if we think about the economic impacts and when our health is affected, you know, these are sensitive issues that people can understand better.
Great, thanks. Okay, last one, really, really quick. Sandro, otherwise we're running out of time.
Thank you. Yes, there was an improvement in these 20 years because at least for species in the list, the country have a mandatory to report the presence of new species to at the European level, and they have to do something in three months. So it's important that scientists that spot new species rapidly report the presence of these new species to the authority and don't wait to publish the paper 1 or 2 years later. So this is our responsibility in confront of the public and our community. So some improvement have been done because for other species outside the regulation, you don't have to do anything. Inside the regulation, you have to do something. So there is a big difference. The problem is, of course, there are few species, and if you think about species that came with the pet trade, for example, you just list few species, and the market just switched to the other one. So it's really difficult to go back to the market.
Yeah, I completely agree. So yes, my last sentence was referred to this point. So the rapid communication should come from scientists as well. So we know that we want to publish, but also a sense of citizenship. We should report before the publication, because in certain cases it's crucial. Maybe for some species it's not possible the complete eradication, but it should be better to have the idea of the report also for trying to control the spread and avoid its transport in other areas. So I completely agree, Sandro, and it's true that the species on the list are managed because mandatory, because it's mandatory. And I wanted to comment and then I escaped from my mind. Oh.
Gonna happen at the coffee break, probably.
Anyway, yeah. There are improvements. We can still do better. The pet trade, yes. There is a discussion also with the EU Commission because for example, I'm risk assessing a lot of crayfish for pet trade. Trust me, I like risk assessment, but at the 10th species, I'm quite tired of assessing the 10 species of crayfish traded in ornamental, in the ornamental online trade. So we pushed why not considering the pathway and not the species. And they answered that it's true that the pathway should be more comprehensive, but they want to have the specific species because it's more easy for them. But we are negotiating, so we never know what will happen in the future. But for the moment, there are there are management plans that want to tackle also the ornamental trade. There were a lot of discussion about white list and not black list for ornamental trade. So I think one of the improvements I see that we are discussing a lot about the problem and how to tackle also from the legislative and management point of view. So maybe sometimes one step ahead and one back, but then there are a lot of negotiation and a lot of working on this. I want to see the more improvements. I would like to see more improvements, and I hope to see in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen. Thank you very much. So we need to move on, and so we welcome on stage Sandra Rojas-Nossa from Universidad de Vigo. She's working in the field of pollination ecology, so she has been working a lot on bees, but since a few years also a lot on hornets. She has been working on methods of management like electric harps. She has been working also on the interaction between hornets and bees for pollination. So she published a very nice paper on the impact of Vespa velutina on pollination. And so it's our big pleasure to have Sandra here. I'm gonna select your talk.
Okay. Thank you, Elena, for this nice talk. A very good introduction for many things I'm going to say. So, I'm Sandra. Thank you for the introduction also, Alessandro, from the Department of Ecology and Animal Biology of the University of Vigo. Vespids are successful invasive species transported intentionally or unintentionally by humans, establishing and expanding in distant regions of the globe for a long time, impacting ecosystems and people. If we analyze the cumulative number of introduced species outside their range, we see an increasing tendency across the last century following industrialization, trade of goods, and transport of people. It is the case of common species to Europe and Asia being transported to far regions of the genus Vespula, as we observe in these maps on the links on the left. The green spots represent the native range of the German and the common wasp. This one you will see here. And in red, the regions of the planet where these species have become invasive. Some of them occur on similar latitudes of North America. For instance, here. But surprisingly, these wasps have also adapted successfully to live under different environmental conditions. In the map, we see a remarkable example of this, considering that the whole life cycle of these animals has to synchronize with the new environment to be able to live on the opposite hemisphere with seasons, 6 months of delay, and a completely new biological interaction network, as in the case of Vespula vulgaris in South America or in Oceania. Within Vespid, the genus Vespa is not the exception. These social insects of big body with colors black, brown, yellow, and orange have also arrived and colonized new regions. Of the 22 extant species of hornets, these 6 are examples of species invasive, neonative, or established outside their range. But there are records of more species being transported and intercepted in ports, or that we are unable to that these were unable to establish. Vespa crabro was intentionally introduced in the USA in the 19th century as a biological control agent against forest-damaging caterpillars, expanding and becoming an invasive species in North America. Vespa orientalis was restricted until the first decade of the 21st century to a relatively narrow area of the East Mediterranean. However, it has the tendency to arrive into new distant regions with an important occurrence of interceptions apparently related to the fruit trade from the original region. I think several colleagues are going to talk about the situation of the species in different countries of Europe, but in Spain, the first records of this species was in 2012, and the population spreads and increases currently across the Mediterranean coast, as we see here. Recently, 2 other species, Vespa bicolor and Vespa mandarina, have been found to establish successful populations outside their native range. Vespa bicolor in Spain and Vespa mandarina in the Pacific coast of Canada and North America. Dr. Heather Mattila is going to talk about the situation in Vespa tropica in Guam, so I don't want to talk too much about this. But So let's begin talking about Vespa velutina, which is the main focus of my talk. First, this nice background, and now let's talk about the process of invasion. Vespa velutina has different colorations or subspecies, and is native to tropical and subtropical regions in Indonesia, Indochina, and Taiwan. The subspecies that arrived to different regions of the planet is Vespa velutina nigritorax, characterized for their yellow legs. It was first observed and recorded in South Korea in 2003, then in Central France in 2004, afterwards in Japan in 2012, and in the USA on this year, spring this year. The invasions in South Korea and France were independent events of invasion of transport, but the population in Japan is coming from this already invasive population in South Korea. The mitochondrial cytochrome C oxidase revealed that in France and Korea, the populations of France and Korea have lower genetic diversity, but this low diversity does not prevent the rapid geographic expansion. We now know that one single species fecundated by several males was able to arrive and colonize and produce these huge invasions at continental scales. So this is another feature of Vespa velutina polyandry, in which one female or queen or giant is fecundated by several males. This is going to be important for the whole process of invasion, because this species is able to arrive and produce an invasion with the minimum propagule, which is one individual. Other species that need both sexes need to be transported both sexes. In this case, no. And this is a nice picture of how the species expanded across Europe in the last 20 years. So it arrived in France, as we said, it expanded to France, then to Spain, afterwards arrived to Portugal and Belgium, then to Italy, Germany, UK, Belgium, Netherlands, Switzerland, Luxembourg, Ireland, and this year was recorded in Hungary. I hope we are going to have a talk about this case a little bit more tomorrow. Okay, this is the cumulative number of records also in the continents, and we see a similar tendency as we saw before with many, like in many other groups of invasive species, with a tendency to accumulate very rapidly in the last 20 to 15 years. The species is able to expand through its own capacities of flight and dispersion, but it also takes profit of human transport to continue expanding to the territory. It is so that we see long distance jumps in this process of invasion in Europe. For instance, the population arriving to Portugal in 2011, to Mallorca from Italy in 2015, to the UK in 2016, to Hamburg in 2019, to Ireland last year. Also the in Ireland in 2021, and in the same year, it arrived a second wave of introduction of invasion to Majorca. In both cases, it was neutralized. I hope tomorrow we are going to have a talk of Marlesa, who is going to talk about this case in detail. And this year we have, as I said, we have a report from Hungary. We still don't know the precedence. It is probably from this population, which is common in the rest of Europe. But I think there are ongoing research about this. Okay, so I've been working in the last years in this region of Spain. It is named Galicia, and the species arrived there in 2012. The first two nests were reported, one to the south. Coming from the population in Portugal, and one to the north, that it was a new introduction, probably via boat. 2 years after, the species began to expand, as we see also, not only in the territory, but also in the number of nests. Here we have the number of nests reported to the authorities along these years. Then, next year, the species invaded the whole coast of Galicia, then began to increase in numbers and also expanding to the interior. And in 2018, it covered the whole territory. Around this year, the species was not more reported, and apparently has arrived to stable situation in terms of number of nests. However, in this year, what we have this year, we have an explosion, a population explosion this year, probably caused by a mild winter. These are not official numbers, but let's expect them for the next spring, so we have the exact number of nests destroyed and confirmation from the authorities. Okay, so after this picture of invasion, let's talk more about biology. This species has an annual cycle. It means that the whole colony has a life that is fulfilled in 1 year. This annual cycle has 2 main phases. One solitary phase, in which only the queens are alive and active or hibernating. And after the first workers emerge, occurs the social phase. During the solitary phase, then this occurs when the queen awakes in the spring, following proper conditions, especially temperatures, minimum temperatures higher to 10 degrees. Then the queen awakes, begins to refill energy, eating mainly carbohydrates from flower, from nectar flower, floral nectar, and then begins the construction of an embryo nest, and provides resources and suitable conditions for the brood. She lays eggs, and approximately 40 days after the lay, begin the emergence of the first workers. This embryo nest is often made in places made by humans, probably because they are safe and protected from environmental conditions. So the first workers emerge. Workers are females too, and they have different levels. They work bringing food, bringing water, bringing also material to continue constructing the nest and making it bigger and bigger. This is named the primary nest. Often this primary nest is moved to another location some meters apart from the primary nest. And it is named the secondary nest. This secondary nest not always occurs this moving, but the secondary nest is often made in the high canopy, the high parts of the trees, so it is protected with leaves and higher than the first nest. Probably provides protection against predators. Then occur, well, this growing of the colony occurs during the summer. In this period, the colony has to grow. So there are many babies to feed, so they need a lot of food. And they feed mainly on protein sources by scavenging or other arthropods that are brought to the nest by the workers. In the maturity of the colony occurs the mating, the reproductive individuals are produced, and they emerge and occur the fecundation of the new fundresses around autumn. Finally, the nest declines. Almost all the population except the new fundresses, giants or queens, survive, feed to be able to survive the winter, and hide into a safe location to spend the winter there, and then the cycle begins again. And then begins a new solitary phase of this species. Because of that, this period of autumn and spring, when the queens are active and the whole colony relies on one individual, are especially interesting for control activities. This is a social insect, meaning that it has castes with tasks repetition, quite important learning and communication. They are able to communicate places for food, and this is a very interesting field, but I think more research is needed to understand this point. What is your face, Denis? don't scare me. Okay, so these castes can be easily differentiated when we see males and females, because the males have longer antennae and have this small, the tip of the abdomen is slightly different, while it is rounded and has two tips, while the females, queens or workers, have the stinger. But between females, it is quite hard to differentiate them. One work says that the mesoscrotum white can help us to distinguish, but this not always occur. Also, the queens have more weight, and the internal morphology also can help us to decide if one individual is a queen or a worker. But it is at simple sight, it is not that easy to differentiate them. Well, about intraspecific competition, there are some research telling us that appears that no intraspecific competition for nesting places going on in the field. For that reason, we see high densities of nests in the invaded regions, with a tendency to increase linearly along the years. One thing that occurs in the first season of the queens is that queens can fight each other for the nests. And in this moment, there can be some intraspecific competition. Otherwise, it is not that easy to see competition, and this is the evidence we have so far. Also, we know that queens of Vespa velutina outperform Vespa crabro in activity, boldness, and exploration. Thus, this represents a competitive advantage when we are talking about this, the competition with other species, especially with Vespa crabro, which is native and is very similar to Vespa velutina, and could be a reason to reduce this invasion. But it is not the case. Vespa velutina has competitive advantages. Velutina has higher immunocompetence against bacteria, and we saw that it is able to harbor common pathogens as Nosematidae, Trypanosomidae, Lipotrophidae, and actively be a dispersal factor of these parasites with potential long-term harmful consequences on the native entomofauna. About enemy release, we see that there are some cases reported of carnivorous plants for trapping Vespa velutina, but this is an inefficient way to control it. Nematodes have been recorded inside the Vespa velutinas, but this has a low potential as a biological control. But maybe fungi has some potential. There are reports, but more research is needed. We have some predators, but both the honey buzzard and the bee eater are migratory birds only restricted to certain areas, and they are not able to eat all these nests we are seeing in some sites. So we know now that this invasion success is related to asociality, annual cycle, polyandry, effective dispersal, high reproductive rates, competitive advantages, and enemy release. So they have a lot of good cards to be invasive. And on top of that, they are opportunist and generalist species. They gather water, fibers, carbohydrates, and the adults feed mainly on carbohydrates and bring protein for the nest to feed the brood. Along the annual cycle, the population as a whole has preference at the beginning of the cycle to sugars. At the middle of the cycle, when the high population growth is occurring, they need a lot of protein. So probably a protein-based bait could be a better bait on that on control activities. And at the end of the year, when these reproductive individuals are feeding, they begin again to be more active eating carbohydrates. This feeding behavior is quite important to understand the impacts on biodiversity. We know that competition is seen in the overlap in the diet of Vespa velutina and Vespa crabro, and this competition between species is higher on related species as Vespa velutina and Vespa crabro. In Japan, the researchers saw that Vespa velutina reproduces males are mating with females of native species. Thus, they are displacing native species by reproductive competition. We also now know that they predate a huge quantity and diversity of arthropods, and they are able to eat approximately 12 kilograms of insect biomass in one season, each nest of different kinds of insects, mainly pollinators. They used to hunt for pollinators in sites where they are congregated, such as flowers. This is a work we made in Galicia where we studied the effects of Vespa velutina hunting for pollinators on the flowers of Mentha suaveolens. We saw that the species produced changes in the behavior of common pollinators such as Apis mellifera, Bombus, small Epidae, and syrphids. As a consequence, the qualitative and the quantitative components of pollination changed, reducing with us the pollination services of this wild plant important for other species. We also saw that in the ivy flowers, they go for hunt pollinators, foraging for nectar, and find mating partners. So the local bar in Galicia for Vespa velutina is the flowers of the ivy, the ibernica. This makes that the pollinators are attacked and they also have less nectar available. So this changes the duration of the visitation and the frequency of visit rates. The more hunted groups in this plant are Syrphidae, Califoridae, and Tachinidae, and Musidae, some flies, and other native Vespids. As a result of these changes in the behavior of pollinators, we saw that occurred a reduction in number of seeds per fruit. So however, Vespa velutina appears to be also pollinating the plant. And we, at the beginning of our work, we asked ourselves, what is going on? Maybe she is also pollinating, but what we saw with our results, it is an inferior pollinator when compared to the native species that it displaces. Recently, we published together with colleagues from Exeter and University of Santiago de Compostela a work also made in Southwest Galicia in 12 sites. We set 3 colonies of European bumblebees per site and monitored Vespa velutina abundances, activity, weight, and parasites of these colonies of bumblebees. We saw that the abundance of Vespa velutina has substantial spatiotemporal variability across sites. This occurs often in this territory, also when hunting in the apiaries. We also saw that Vespa velutina hunts at bumblebee colonies. It is attracted more when the colonies have more foraging traffic. Of the more than 100 recorded predation attempts, we see that it was never successful hunting a bumblebee. We think it is because of the defensive strategy of bumblebees that I want to share with you. So the Vespa velutina forages similarly to how it forages in front of the honeybee colonies, waiting in suspended flight in front of the entrance or besides the entrance, pursued the bumblebees arriving or departing, try to catch them on the flight. But when the bumblebee feels that it is trapped, it fails. It doesn't continue flying. It fails. And with this hit, when it hits the ground, the velutina releases the bumblebee. Often the bumblebee also leave out the stinger, so it fights. It fights with weight and it fights with weapons, which is good news. But what we saw when we weighted these colonies, we observed a negative correlation with the local velutina densities. When there are many velutinas, colonies have less weight. So this can be an indirect effect, whether it can be by the predation attempts themselves, other by competition or other factors that we haven't explored yet. But they are still no predating in front of the colonies, but still there is a negative effect on the bumblebees too. So how many do? Okay. But what our best system study so far is the impacts of Vespa velutina on honeybees. We know that they are ferocious hunters of honeybees, and they are attracted to hives' fragrances. European honeybees can perform defenses, but these are not effective to reduce the predation of several velutinas across the day, across the season. We made an experiment with electric harps, and we measured the performance of the honeybee colonies in 3 apiaries of Galicia in 2020. We set 12 hives into treatment, 6 hives unprotected and 6 hives protected with harps in this beautiful region of Galicia. Here we see on the left the protected hives and 1 Vespa velutina falling. I think we're going to have tomorrow a talk about harps, so I'm not going to talk too much about this, but we found that these devices reduced the predation pressure in the apiaries when they are set in front of the hives perpendicularly to the entrance. We also saw that the different sites have different abundances of Vespa velutina hunting. These devices were able to reduce to 0 the predation in sites where Vespa velutina was less common, but in other sites it was reduced by not to 0. What we saw when we analyzed the differences of protected versus unprotected hives, in red, we see the hives where Vespa velutina was predating ad libitum. On the left, we see the number of foraging workers. After 1 month of the beginning of the predation season, the bees stopped foraging. They all workers and the workers just stayed inside the hive and do not forage, and they don't make any extra hive activities, no water provisioning, no fanning, no cleaning. So this is now called the paralysis of the colony. And this paralysis caused the pollen, the stop of pollen income too, which is largely related with the brood production. We saw also that this is the colony survivorship of our 2 treatments, and we saw that hunting pressure affected the weight of the workers that arrive that are produced in autumn. So the workers that have to survive the winter have less weight. Therefore, we have colonies with less people, and impoverished colonies, we have mager workers, and we have low resources because they didn't fly for foraging, and they were inside the hive eating all resources that they had. So as a consequence of this process, we see a lower survivorship of colonies, so important that 30 or 50% of the colonies can die during the winter or at the beginning of the spring. This is a kind of resume. When predation occurs in honeybees, then the number of workers reduces. It is affected also the gathering of pollen, nectar, and resins, and of course the pollination services these insects provide. The paralysis of the colony has an impact on beekeeping too, and it is calculated that 30 million per year is the cost of this colony loss is around this number of euros per year. The fruit sector is thus affected by the lack of pollination services and also by the damages that they produce in the summer to the fruits. Some societal impacts are important, and I think we're going to have also a talk about this, but the species produces a higher pressure on health systems and fear in the population. This fear in the population and in the beekeepers themselves causes that people use non-selective methods to fight against the Vespa velutina, and this affects biodiversity. And again, biodiversity, if we take the opportunity of the nature to defend against these invasive species, they have less tools to defend, and so on and so on. Something that we still don't know, but I think it is worth to talk about, is also the loss of cultural assets. These are beautiful hives and apiaries in the region where I live that have traditional way to be constructed and be with the environment, and this is being lost because these beekeepers can't fight against Vespa velutina. Finally, another gaps in the knowledge are, I think the most important here is this: of all the research topics concerning Vespa velutina covered in the literature until 2021, there is very little research on impacts on biodiversity and ecosystem services. That is a huge gap. Another important gap is the impacts on economy, because economy numbers, it is easy to politicians to understand, to many people to understand. So if we understand the numbers, at least for the economic sectors, we can have more tools to move people, to move resources, and to find suitable solutions. And also monitoring and eradication. I think that is quite important. Monitoring is quite important, and we have few research to do. When I arrived to the United States, one of the first questions was, how do you monitor this species? Sadly, for instance, in Spain, we have a very poor monitoring system. We don't have a monitoring system at the national level. We have some monitoring systems only for communities. So we need to work together more and more and more. So finally, thank you. Thank you for being present here. Thank you to the University of Vigo, to the COLOSS Association, and to the organizers of this event, and all people that have contributed to all these works that they are a lot and very important things. They are very important for our work as scientists. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you a lot for this overview, which introduced us to the Vespa velutina landscape, this veluscape that we need to know for the next talks. And thank you also for the work you've been doing and you're still doing on the impact on other insects rather than bees. So the importance of impacts on pollination is something we really need. Actually. Yeah. Questions, Denis?
Thank you. Sandra, yeah, congratulations for the talk. I mean, it's good. I have two questions, or possibly three, but I don't want to keep the microphone. Yeah, concerning the competition between queens, I think this is a very important point. And at the beginning of the introduction, quite a lot of people made the impression that there is competition between queens and that would regulate the increase of the population, and it didn't do that. I mean, and I completely disagree with this question of competition between queens, intraspecific and even interspecific. And we have a lot of, I mean, with Juliette, we worked a lot on that with wintering queens. And we saw a big amount of queens, even if it is not allowed, I mean, by the European rules, but we did. And we kept these queens by groups, most of them, 15 queens in small boxes like that. We never saw any competition except for food, if the food is limiting, that's all. And yeah, I think it is damaging for the, or it was damaging for the opinion of the beekeepers, because most of them believed that invasion could regulate by itself just by the competition between queens. And now we start to see the story of competition between crabrow and velutina. And for us, at least, maybe in Bordeaux, we are in a specific area, but I mean, we start to see cooperation between the two species in many cases. And I think this is a complicated point, the story of competition, because of course it depends on the population density, both, and possibly we can find competition with very high densities, which is not the case in most places. And so I don't know what is your opinion on that.
Everybody heard that question? The question was related with competition between queens of Vespa velutina and competition between queens of Vespa velutina and Vespa crabrow. What is my opinion? I haven't done research about that. I only have the scientific work made on that. What I think, and I have read, is that there can occur competition in some cases, but it's quite local competition. Like, for instance, when they fight each other, and sometimes under the nest, some people report that there are queens killed when there is a primary embryo nest. And also, they use the embryo nest. They kill the queen and they left there hanging the embryo nest, waiting for another queen to come and take this nest. And so the people say that it is possible to kill some queens. So there is possible that some competition at that point. But the numbers of the increase in the number of nests suggests that at that scale, there is no competition, no strong competition. Do you want to say something? No? About that? Because it is a very interesting point that other people can.
I mean, I don't know what is happening with this, but we found in in like the 50%, like in 30 embryo nests, that 2 queens were inside. So, I mean, I don't know what is happening. I don't know. I cannot say because they were removed. So I don't know what is happening inside. But what we saw is that what we found. I don't know if it's, I think that is more questions now, but it's what we found. It's not an answer, I know. It's more questions like.
Sorry, when you say they were removed, do you have the queens or not? Okay, did you dissect them? Did you open it? All full of ovaries and, okay.
Well, some queens can die in the first days because of environmental conditions or because they were predated. That can occur too, but I think we don't have numbers about that.
We found in 60 nests males and females in embryo nest, and it's true that we didn't examine them, and we don't know if they are diploids or haploids. But also we found this, and I don't know if or maybe in the discussion we can discuss this. So if someone knows something else about. But because all the time it's talking like the life cycle is like the queens put eggs and these eggs are workers. I mean, it's also males. So this is a point that I think is important.
I think it's a very interesting point. The species is very adaptable. We have seen also complete nests in December and January in our region when the winter is not too cold. So they are surviving, but how is functioning this colony? What happens with this queen? It was replaced by a new queen, and this new queen continues growing, making this colony survive. We don't know. We need to make more research on that point too.
Anyway, the reproduction of males is not a novelty for Vespid in general. So it's probably more a novelty for velutina because we are used to report the cycle like that, as we all do, but there are many variations. And it might be advantageous if you have males. Yeah, for example, in Polystene, it happens quite a lot that you have early males and they can fecundate other females in case. So, I mean, I don't know if it's happening in velutina that.
Is it possible they are diploid males? So if you not,
I think it's better you use that.
Sorry. Yep. I mean, if you don't look at the genotype, you cannot be sure. Even, I mean, it has happened to us in Liguria. We found at least 5 or 6 nests over the years. There were primary nests, like the first 20 wasps inside the nest, and half of them were males. But is it possible that they were actually diploid males because of the sex determinant locus? So, but it happens.
Yeah. Then the proposal of getting it off the bread. Question from online? From the money, no. Okay.
Sorry, I have another question concerning the mating sites. This is, to my opinion, a very important question, because if we know where the mating occurs, and we already know it occurs very often in the nest, but I mean, if you have outside mating sites, this is very important because there are not so many insects that are using host plants for mating sites. This is quite original, this strategy of mating. But if it is the case, I mean, we know where to fight against the hornet. I mean, we just have to place arbs. Close, you said the EV could be a mating site. Then we have to place the arbs close to the EV. And it's because then we will kill the new genes.
Yes.
And that's all.
Yes.
But I don't believe in it. I'm sorry.
What?
Because the point with EV, so this is clear. We found a lot of males on it. And this is also interesting to know why males are going to this. Not for predation. There are other ways to predate insects. Can be to come back to the nest with the nuptial gifts. And this is not studied. But it can be, I mean. But the fact that So we can also find some workers. But I mean, for me, so genes. And this is an important point.
Yeah.
The last question there.
For the people at home, Denis Thiéry made a comment about the importance of detecting where the mating is occurring. This is quite important to be understood, and we don't exactly know. And also the behavior in the ivies, we can see it at this time. Not in Pisa, because yesterday I saw one flowering ivy and had a lot of flies and no and honeybees, but no Vespa velutina. I thought what was quite nice.
Fine. You say that the effectiveness of electric harps is very high, and I just wonder, because I'm just trying to do some observations with some harps, wet harps, and I just noticed that sometimes some hornets just bump into the wires, and then for some reasons they fall outside the water, so they don't die. So my question is, do you think that the effectiveness of electric harps could be reduced just because the hornets might learn to avoid them?
The effectiveness of harps can change for many reasons. First, they learn how to avoid them. If they fall once and they are able to escape, they won't easily be trapped again. So what we do in Galicia is to change the places of harps so they don't get habituated to the same place, and by surprise and with luck. Also, when there is too many, well, the voltage you give to the wires, the distance between the wires, how humid it is, the environment, because it functions different. If one velutina stays hanging there, produces a bridge, and the harp doesn't function. If there are too much velutinas falling, the device that gives energy to the wires doesn't function quite well. So there are many things happening there. I also used a harp which is not wet. We developed this kind of harp, and the schema is on the publication. Where was it? This type of harp we worked, it is made, it has a trap below. It is a cage, it is not wet, it is a cage where the velutinas fall. The electricity is not too high, they don't die because of the electric shock, they die after waking up of this first electric shock. They are able to awake and crawl into this cage that has some holes made for the bees to escape and smaller insects to escape. And then they crawl until these bottles and they die into the bottle. So the construction of each harp is different. Another thing important to say about harps is that there is no legislation of harps. There is no regulation of harps. So we are not allowed to use these devices in the nature with electricity, open electricity in the nature. So this is a point, a gray area in the legislation, and what we can use to protect our bees.
Thanks.
Okay, so welcome back. It's a great pleasure to have Denis Thiéry here. He works at the INRAe in France, south of France, southwest of France, near Bordeaux. And Denis is an entomologist, behavioral ecologist, He has been working a lot on chemical ecology and the interaction between insect and plants. But for most people in this room, he's known as one of the most productive authors on Vespa velutina since the very beginning. He has been one of the first, among the first ones to study velutina since the very first years. So it's a great pleasure, Denis. He has the difficult task of talking about what has worked over this year and what not. And maybe it's more, there are more not than what worked. We're gonna hear from him. We asked specifically to him to sort of sum up the things that went well and the things that didn't went well. So thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you, Ali, for inviting. And yeah, I started with this, and we are now 9 billion on the Earth, which is clearly too much. But anyway, and we don't know how many on it. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I will try to present in some slides. It is a very personal view of what we did in science and in politics during almost 20 years. And the point is that we started with one colony, and there is debate concerning the number of colonies in Europe. It can be 1 million, or let's say 500,000, or between something between. But anyway, it is enormous. That also means eradication is not possible. But we already knew that at the beginning of the introduction, or at least a few people knew that. So we can have this are typical picture taken in Bordeaux. We have very big population of hornets in Bordeaux, and it was very early at the beginning of the invasion. 206 started in Bordeaux, and the introduction was 204, remember? And we can have a very big nest. So this nest, which is an electrical pylon, is about 1 meter diameter, and it's okay. I mean, it's not afraid by electricity or by magnetic fields around. And beautiful pictures from my colleague, Sylvie Richard, which are hornet attacking bees on the board. Okay. Well, as I told you, we started in 2004 from one colony to possibly 1 million, from one small city. Villeneuve-sur-Lot is a small city, about 20,000 people living there, to now 8 countries. And yeah, as I told you, this would weaken the idea of an eradication. And I was at the very beginning against this story of eradication. And it was very damaging for the beekeepers, this, because many beekeepers believed or were convinced by some scientists that eradication was possible. Okay, Sandra showed this the same type of picture. So it is now in the United States. So 20 years after, of course, scientists were all very good. I mean, we're all scientists over there, so it's okay. We're there for that. And we did the job. I don't know what type of job, but anyway. And of course, the list is longer concerning the policymakers. Yeah, I tried to identify some points. Nothing was really coordinated, both from, I mean, in the loop, both from all actors, policymakers, also in science. There was clearly a lack of coordination between scientists at the beginning. I don't know if it is the same in your countries, but in France, we have clearly a lack of coordination between 2 ministries, which has to do with the hornet and the bees, which is agriculture, this is for beekeeping, and environment. These are not the same type of people, they're not speaking together, and they have not the same motivations. And this was very damaging for years, because it was a sort of ping-pong game, each one sending the ball to the other one, and nothing was clearly done. And another point, which appeared to me very clearly, yeah, some colleagues doesn't agree with that, but identified that only hobby beekeepers had also not the same motivation as compared to professional beekeepers. And during years, this was very important. Because, I mean, in France, for example, we needed about 6 years, 7 years for classification of the hornet as a harmful species, which is really too long. I mean, I have colleagues in, for example, in France, in Ile de la Réunion with flies, fruit flies. It takes 3 months to class a species in harmful as a. And it was almost impossible during several years to find clear data the effect of the hornet on the. There are some saying it has no effect. Even some scientists say that. It is not real predation. It is not enough to. And bee collapse was not the result of hornets and all this type of. Okay, and this was very damaging. Well, what about the scientific knowledge? Sandra already presented some work studies. This is another one. I should focus on the left on this image, which is the book of Stradberry. I like it a lot. This is 1975, 50 years ago. Stradberry identified the problem with invasion by Vespids and hornets too. He was warning, just said, okay, he's from New Zealand, which is a specific case, New Zealand, Australia, this island, but he always says, I wrote, never make a queen entering on the country or continent. And he was right. But yeah, so the situation was before 2004, there was almost no publication. We could identify from the was 3. We know all of them, of course. And then you have a strong increase, and now it's around 320 years. And just try to identify the journals. What is quite interesting, to my opinion, is you have only very small proportion concerning biological invasion scientific journals, I mean. So that means only little is published in biological invasion journals. And to my opinion, it is a bit problematic. Anyway, also the diversity of journal, more than 100 scientific journals for 286 publications, to my opinion, is also problematic, but we can discuss about it. Okay, but we have to consider this is a very complicated model to study. We had this discussion at coffee with 2 Spanish girls over there. It is dangerous. There are rules, mandatory rules, and it's almost impossible to have in a lab. And we all know behavioral ecologists, chemical ecologists, people working a lot on insects, that the knowledge is some more or less proportional to the capacity to make stock culture and to have strength in the lab. Otherwise, it's very complicated. And for hornets, it's very dangerous. So that means you cannot do anything, almost anything in a nest, which is in a 30-meter tree. You cannot put cameras on it, inside it, on the scopes, or this type of things we can do easily on bees, on hives. And so this is limiting the knowledge. Anyway, so there is a big amount of publication, a big increase in the number of publications, but there are some very important points which are lacking knowledge. So Sandra identified more points, and this was good. So this is a very personal view. I think we are lacking interaction among the colony members and also interaction between hunters. Do they cooperate? Do they compete? In which conditions they do this and or they do this? What do they do when a crab roe is going in the group, which occurs now very often? We don't know in this. We know a little about nest fidelity. We published some things with Karin on that, but this is clearly not enough. Means trying to catch workers and to put them in a nest, in a denser nest. Larval food. So I put an example. I mean, there are good works done by an Orientalist, and for example, by the Israeli group, Volov, Bodmer, Bushby, Levin. This is very good concerning the requirements in fatty acids, saturated, unsaturated fatty acids. Just to answer the question, I mean, in Vespa velutina during the cycle, Sandra showed the cycle, you have changes, clear changes in food requirement during the season. And we have to understand why at one point in the season, this is this turning point, they start to attack bees, which is not anecdotic. I mean, this is bees is a dangerous food because hornet can be killed, even if you perfectly showed that it's not very efficient. But anyway, 1-to-1 it can be killed. So it should have some biological function, just the start of the predation of bees. Also, the material needed for nest construction. I mean, to my opinion, this is very important too. Yeah, and this, for example, would explain, because we don't know where nests are located, this would explain why some nests are located in specific trees are there. This should be studied. Well, I will go to the practices. And the Spanish colleague, Ana Isabel Garcia Arias and Joana Godinho and this team, I participated in it. This was the Atlantic Positive Project. This was a socioeconomic, and this is interesting because about 500 beekeepers were surveyed, and in France, in Spain, in Portugal, concerning their practice. And so this is one of the results. There are many of them concerning the costs and anything. But yeah, this is a distribution of the different type of practices. So this is an average for the 4 regions. I didn't show it, but what is interesting is you have many differences between the blue, the green, and the orange. And these are differences which can be explained by the tradition and by many things. Anyway, you have 90% of beekeepers using queens or worker trapping, which is a big majority. Quite a lot reducing the entry of the hives. This is what we do very much in France, but this is not the same in any countries. Artificial feeding, this is more in Spain and more in Portugal, where we don't do that very much in France. We can discuss about it afterwards. And yeah, I would say electric harps. So Sandra was one of the first to publish something on that. And this is nice because you can see electric harps is about 16% of beekeepers using it now, and it is increasing, at least in France. And Trojans, I will have a slide on that, a specific slide on that during the talk. Okay. So at the beginning of the introduction, I don't know if you have this experience, Elena, but you have optimist people, pessimist people, realist people. What is probably worse is nihilist people, so there's nothing there. Utopist, but clearly we could identify this type of people at the beginning of the Vespa velutina, and both in scientists, in beekeepers, but also in policymakers. And this is quite problematic. Well, some reason explaining a lot. You perfectly identified that for a biological invasion, we have to react very quickly, rapidly. That's what you said. And clearly in Vespa, we had a lack in our activity. But you can see the empty glass or the half-full glass. I believe, and my opinion is that we are a lack of activity. It took about 5-6 years. And when you see the patterns of increasing population, this will be presented by Quentin, I guess. I mean, it started 1 nest, then 100 nests, then 500 nests, then thousands of nests, and it was finished. I mean, after we are running after the invasion. One possibility. Yeah. First, I mean, 3 years ago, I did a conference to beekeepers in the city where the internet was introduced. And the beekeeper, an old man, came to me and told me, oh yeah, you know, in 2005, I started to kill hornets in front of my hives with my badminton racket. So that means predation already started at this time. And he told me, but nobody listened to me. This was why my question, who is listening to that? And yeah, it could have been a sort of warning for the invasion. And we have many examples of this. One of the problems is the invasion occurred during the problem of bee collapse. I don't want to go back to the Roundup stories and all beekeepers demonstrating against Bayer and this. And clearly there were beekeepers saying, okay, but the main fight concerns the pesticides, possibly varroa too, but mainly pesticides. And people saying your hornet is attacking hives just to put the shade on it. And I think it was a problem to make losing time on that. Yeah, I said already that apiculture concerns 2 ministries. And for the foundings, it was quite complicated at this time. And it took almost 8 years to register Vespa velutina as a normal species. This I cannot understand. But And we clearly get the impression that everybody tried to pass the hot potato to something else. We don't know whom exactly. And after it was too late. I'm sorry, I belong to the pessimist. So more on pessimist view. Anyway, and there was still some optimism, and this is, we could find that in scientific literature, in newspaper. I took few examples, but for sure you can find many of them that we have the solution. I mean, a colleague said in 5 years we will have solved the problem. Okay, this was in 2019, so now, okay, the problem is solved. In internet, there was plenty of communication of miracle solution, miracle traps, anything. So sometimes very expensive. None works. I mean, globally, none works. Very recently, we found a paper where you can read Vespa velutina predation may represent an additional risk factor. This is an additional, it's not the main risk factor. In mortality of currently declining bee colonies. So that means bee colonies are already declining. So that means Vespa velutina is almost nothing. Okay. And I will go back to the first control option, which were at the beginning very limited. It was started with traps, because humans we have in mind that traps is a sort of solution for everything. Okay, there will be some slides on that. Badminton rackets, so that means killing by hand hornets, and this was the very first method used by the beekeepers. And nest destruction, I mean, in France, nest destruction started very early by the beekeepers themselves. So they organized themselves, a beekeeper union. And for example, in the Bordeaux area, they trained the first year, it was 2007, 53 people destroying the nest with purge, injecting sulfur dioxide in it. But we lost a lot of energy on that. And I should say, a lot of money were put on trapping queens. We can discuss on that, but the amount of money put on trapping queens was enormous, and this in many countries. As I told you, the idea of trapping pests is not novel. In agriculture, at least, you can see a trap with pheromones, and there are two types of traps. Sandra spoke about electrical traps, which are not baited. No, they are not supposed to be attractive. These are interception traps. And baited traps, so that means with an attractant, can be food or something like food or pheromone, just to make it simple. But they are perfect for pest monitoring. But in fact, if you go to a large amount of literature on that, you have only very few examples of population control or education with traps. For me, I know only 3 examples of that. But we all believed it should have worked in our nets. Okay. But you have to remind that to be efficient, a trap has to be placed, and many people forget that where the pest used to be. And in agriculture, I mean, if we want to control pest in viticulture, for example, it's quite easy. You put the trap in the vineyard. The pest is there, it works. But if you don't know where the pest is, you just trap by random, which is inefficient at all. Well, I put only, how many? 10? I should have put 100. This is the same. They are more or less the same. Globally, you have 3 types of traps. I should say 4. On the left, a fish. This is a picture I took in Mallorca with Maria Lezamar, and when we made the visit of the site where the hornet entered. So this is very efficient. I mean, you can see hornet on that. You can tell us a fish like that, it lasts about 2 hours and it is and it disappears. And then different type of hornet. This is this yellow pot. This is the first trap we use in Bordeaux, and it was very efficient with apple in it. But I will say on the next slide that whatever you put as a liquid, it works more or less. And yeah. The other traps which make with a cone in it, which makes the hornet entering in it, it cannot get out. So you have 3 of them there. One is dry, and this one is dry too, and this is a liquid one. And when I say sophisticated one, you see on the right below something very complicated. Even very simple, so everyone can enter in it, but you have a system, and there are different systems, optical or based on the weight, on the size, everything, and it makes so smaller species can get out, and normally you can collect only hornets. I know. Yeah, I shouldn't say it doesn't work, but I mean, this is not very efficient. And we will have a look and very efficient trap after that. And if you want to control a species, you need a very efficient trap, not only trapping few hundred of individuals. This is a classical, the bottle over there, used for queen trapping. Concerning the queen trapping, this is the next slide. Okay, so these are traps with bait. Make it simple. You have two types of baits, all works. These are syrups, carbohydrates, or food, fish, meat, fresh, oysters. This is very efficient. Shrimps are very efficient. This is a trap which odorizes with shrimps. This is a 2-day collection. You see, this is quite efficient. And of course, you have a commercial development of this type of, okay. But what is important is traps have to be placed where the net is. Already said that. But since hornets are generalists, and we have to consider this, hornet is a generalist insect feeder. Non-target species are also attracted because you have to use non-specific food attractants. And this is a problem of the biodiversity. Well, I just made this slide very quickly. Yeah, concerning the Trojan horse strategies. We can discuss on it. I'm completely against this type of method. And for example, in INRAe, I had something to say in France concerning the INRAe, because our lab represented INRAe. I never wanted to try this technique for several reasons, and we can discuss on this reason. But we don't have any idea of the efficiency. I'm sorry, there are mistakes because I did the slide very quickly because we were discussing about it. It can damage on long term the good image of apiculture. I think this is very important because asking the beekeepers to put insecticide in the wild, yeah, it is completely orthogonal to the idea of beekeepers who are ecologists, taking care of the nature and things like that. We don't know the effects on dead nest, consumer, birds, and all this type of things. Yeah, for people who don't know Trojan horse, you take a trap with a bait, attractive, you put insecticide in it, you allow so you modify the trap in sort of the hornet is capable to escape the trap. So it's supposed to go back to the nest with insecticide. And of course, you don't know the amount of insecticide is carrying back to the nest. And also, this is very important, at least in France, we are now in agriculture in a dynamic of pesticide reduction in agriculture, but also in landscape. And this is completely orthogonal. For me, for example, I'm also working a lot with vine growers. When I go to these people and I say, okay, you will try next year to reduce 2 times the number of insecticide. They say, oh yeah, is it you? You are saying that? And you know, there are people putting insecticide bait in the nature and we don't know where it goes. And it can be very counterproductive, this type of things. And it doesn't work. And we can debate about it, but I maintain it doesn't work. Well, concerning trapping of the queen, first question, so it started very early. And for example, in Aquitaine, so Bordeaux area, the big Bordeaux area, I mean, almost all the cities founded this queen trapping. This was very expensive. To my opinion, this didn't reduce the Vespa velutina population. For example, this year, we have enormous population. But we all know it is insufficient, but there is, to my opinion, again, a psychological fact. So, I mean, you have beekeepers, they want to do something. And for me, when I'm with beekeepers advising them or making conferences, I just say, okay, but do something, destroy the nest and trap the queens, because we have nothing else except the harps now. So it should be maintained. But you know the story, so it has to be controlled, not to place the trap too late in the season, etc., etc. Yeah, our experience now, we use this type of traps. You can see that this is very efficient. So this is not wet. This is a dry trap. So this is an ass. Okay, but I mean there are many examples. Should remind that when a nest can produce 100 new genes, for example, you take a locality with 50 nests, that means 5,000 genes can be produced. We are never capable to trap more than, let's say, 100 queens in such an area. So it means it's less than 10%, so that means it's nothing. Sort of water drop in an ocean or something like that. And it is rather expensive. Almost impossible to handle at large scale, because also the question, if we want to go to an eradication, it has to be on large scale. It's not enough to just to put traps in a very small city. You have to put them everywhere. Question, who is going to do the job? Which is very expensive. I mean, we are now in a 21st century, and I mean, people, working people, this is very expensive, and most of the people want to be paid for that. We probably underestimated the side effect on biodiversity. I believe so. And this is a very limited efficiency if we place it at random. The cost. So this is again from the same project. So the value production of beekeeping. This is of course an average of the 4 regions. The cost of fight against Vespa velutina. So these are the real costs which are declared by the beekeepers. This is not a modeling study like you presented, Sandra. It's almost 10%, and the cost of trapping, I said 90% of the beekeepers use trapping, is about 5% of the value production, which is enormous. Well, as a chemical ecologist, I should promote chemical ecology, of course. So just to show you that there is very good science done on that. And there is very good science on Vespa velutina. This was done by Antoine Couteau, PhD, neurobiologist. So concerning the brain, simply in insects, or hornets have big brains like bees. They learn a lot, many things, visual, olfactory. And if you look to the olfactory system, we have the system which is quite simple. So you see the image in the center, and the yellow row. This is what we call image macroglomerular. When you have this type of structure in the brain, that means pheromone is active. This is the same in mouse. And the bigger is this macroglomerular, just to make it simple for people who are not neurobiologists, normally the bigger is the reaction to pheromone. Good. And the pheromone was identified, the sex pheromone, by Pigment quite a long time ago. But there were almost no study on male behavior, which is completely different to what occurs in Lepidoptera, where you have a huge literature concerning the male behavior, zigzagging, counter-turning, all these type of stories. You have nothing on the, so we don't know where mating occurs, and we don't know about the male behavior. But they published that the response to pheromones, of course they tested it, is very contextual, which is the case in most social insects. So, but we still believe, or few believe, that it would solve the problem to make mating disruption against the hornet. And to my opinion, this is very optimistic. Yeah, to make a good mating disruption, which is very difficult in Lepidoptera, you have to put large amount of pheromones where the mating occurs. And we don't know in velutina where the mating occurs, and there are still debates on that, and this is understudied. Well, and if the solution, if we accept the idea that mating occurs in the nest or on ivy, so it's simple, you just have to spray pheromone on it. If it is ivy, it is simple. If it is a nest, I mean, if you find a nest, why not to destroy the nest? I mean, rather than spraying pheromones on it, this is completely crazy. And I mean, when you explain that to beekeepers, I mean, they just laugh because yeah, they say, okay, I have the nest, I will kill it, I will burn it or anything, and it works. And also, we should remind that even in mouse, mating disruption is never 100% mating inhibition, and that Vespa velutina is a multiple mating system, and one male is enough to mate a female and enough to make a next generation. And of course, a volatile alarm pheromone was identified too. You can see the molecules there, but to date, response of workers are very variable, and yeah, it's not clear to expect a rapid application on that. We tried also to stimulate an AB aggressivity, but it's never working a lot. Well, Sandra, you did you presented the unsuccessful story of Sarracenia, so I don't want to be back on that. But there are still scientific work done on that, and Monte put it on that. It's very strange. Anyway, at the time, there is a PhD student on that in Montpellier. I don't know why, because this is clear it doesn't work. But anyway, we have food baits. Can be plant or plant different material. So, as you said in your talk, Sandra, Antoine Couteau did some work in +1. This is very preliminary work. Identified that molecule like geranium, beta-ocimene, paraxylene, which is the fish odor active. But nothing is very convincing. And of course, we tried most of these molecules. Possibly were not very good, but I don't know. It doesn't work clearly, this type of things. Well, net destruction. Just to, so that means I have to finish? 5 minutes? Okay. So, you know this type of destruction. This is the data collected from Brittany. So this is a small part of France. And this is more or less the same type of number as you presented, Sandra, in Galicia, as far as I remember. So, for example, in 2018, they destroyed 21,000 nests. And you see the dynamic. And these are recorded nests. I mean, they record, so this is done by the beekeepers, the union of beekeepers and different type of association. So this is quite safe, this type of data. This is a lot. And I was told this year it increased again. Yeah. But the point is that it is very limited by our capacity to find the nest very early. And this is the limiting factor of destruction. We belong to an association close to Bordeaux, which is a small city, about 10 square kilometers. This year, we destroyed 52 nests between the beginning of September and now. And there are still nests because there are many hornets flying at this time. So possibly there will be 100 nests on 10 square kilometer. And if I remember the densities you showed on your slide, which is 12, 17 nests per square kilometer, which was what we found in different places in France. I mean, when you have this is enormous. 1 kilometer is very small. Well, radiotelemetry, you did things about that. So the story started when Peter Kennedy came to Bordeaux, and we published this with tags. It is working very well. It is time-consuming and quite expensive, but it works. Okay. One question: what is lacking in the knowledge? To my opinion, you will say Denis is telling us there are many things lacking, but okay, trying to make a short list. Hibernation site of the queen. This is a big question. I wouldn't say we are trying to solve this, but we had the surprise to collect a lot of queens in the city, the center city of Bordeaux. So you have no hives there. You have only houses. It's quite dense population. And as you can see, this is a collect of about 1 week. The right in this type of trap. And Zoe, I took under your control. I mean, this year, Mr. Gredo trapped 100 queens in his garden with this type of trap quite easily. I mean, so possibly the winter in cities. Well, biological control, Sandra, you told something about that. Clearly, I see 2 options, which are entomopathogenous fungi. We work on that. And also nice things done on viruses. Possibly it will be a solution in the future concerning to control the population, which is biological control. Well, one question, did we put enough energy on the defense by the prey? So you clearly said this is not efficient, but bees are able to learn and to, so you can see this bowling behavior, most of you know. You can see the barb there, and you can see here, for example, 2 hornets attacking a bee, a single bee, and she's defending herself. So there are some works on that. And I think we should continue concerning the comparison between the races, the bee races, and their aggressiveness. Well, we now believe, and I guess, Sandra, you share this, this point, that trapping should be done intensively at the beginning of winter, at the end of summer, just to protect the hives and to protect the colony and to make them wintering in good shape. So, concerning the harps, you presented the data on that. There will be a talk tomorrow on that. Yeah, so trying to make the hive in good condition, so to make the bee happy. This is to reduce the predation and have stress, clearly. And concerning Vespa, on the other side, to reduce the food income, this is very important, and you said on your work you published, I mean, individuals are smaller. This is clear, we found the same to you. It reduces population size and larval size, which is for the next generation at this period of the year, which this is very important because we get the impression this will make smaller queens. Well, so you will have a talk by Zoe tomorrow afternoon. And I will finish with one pessimist view and 2 optimistic view. Pessimist view, I mean, Vespa velutina predate on bumblebees, but this we know for long. I mean, already we did some observation when Karin was in the postdoc. There is no real competition, to our opinion, and according to what we see, between velutina and crabro. And what is quite pessimistic is that now we get the impression that crabro increase its predation on bees, and clearly in the big region of Bordeaux, I mean, the population of Vespa crabro are increasing since the beginning of the entry of Vespa velutina. Is there any correlation between both? This is quite complicated, but this is an impression. And anyway, now we can see crabro predating on hives, which was never the case before. Well, optimistic view, and I'm almost finished. Bee modifies their foraging behaviors, this is clear. But what we observed is that hornets do. So that means the bees are now pollinating with big pressure of hornets earlier in the morning, but that means the hornets are chasing earlier in the morning too, which was not the case before. Yeah, optimistic is we start observing bees leaving the barb and chasing individually the hornet. So this is not fight, this is chasing just by flight, but this still remains anecdotal, and the question is that, can honeybees learn this and improve this type of behavior? Well, a point which is important, we developed now, we have a big project working on bioaccumulation and biomagnification of pesticides in hornet. So you can see on the picture, here you can see crabro predating. Well, so we classically, so what we take is single individuals and we can analyze the pesticide in it. And if I told you that half of the nest was contaminated, so we publish this in environmental I don't have the name, never mind. Anyway, we studied almost 25 nests in urban area, suburban area, in the wild, and we found almost 50% of the nest with individuals contaminated with either insecticide, fungicide, herbicides. So that means if you go back to what occurs with honeybees, I mean, we all know that honeybees are losing their memory capacity to orientate with because of pesticides. So one can expect that hornet will do the same very quickly. And this is quite optimistic, this. Viruses is fungi. And what is also interesting, we had a discussion concerning intra-specific competition for workers. In big population area, we start to observe hornets, which are now behaving as scavenger. And before they never did that. And so that means harvesting dead prey. And this could change the food given to the larvae. Another optimistic view. Yeah, some slides, some pictures are moved. Anyway, just a joke. Huh? So we can use it as flying spies. You know that cockroaches were used as spies with a camera in it and this. Food and drink. So in France, we have this type of drink, which is an energizing drink made of hornet extract. Bad luck, they are the sponsor of the French Federation of Athleticism, and we had 0 medals in the last World Championships, possibly not very good. And our colleagues are selecting with hornets like this, and yeah, it can be an issue to eat them. Yeah, and the other picture over there, you see a hornet attached. So this is a treadmill, and the joke was, can we use it to make it turning to produce energy, which can be important in our. Well, and I thank you for attention. I thank the organizers, especially Ali, Cini, to invite us in a country of Vespas. I should reward a lot of people who have worked with me, and I think I forgot Juliette Poedat. This is a mistake of me, and she did very important work on that. And you can see B defending the entry in this very nice posture, which is fighting the hornet. And this is also optimistic because we see more and more. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Denis, for this rich talk, and it's a very provocative one, I guess, full of strong messages. We might discuss a lot. Questions? Yeah.
Also, thank you for that many food for thought. But then about the traps, I would be interested, as you said, how difficult it is to set the traps at good positions. Does this mean that traps are not a good tool for areas where we're waiting for invasion, where we want to monitor for first occurrence?
What do you mean?
As the traps are only very efficient when you know where the animal is. The question is, when we are in a country where it is not here yet, and we want to monitor for first appearance, do traps work in your opinion? Okay, Austria don't have traps. Doesn't have the Vespa. Does it make to use traps to look
traps around the lights, or
pardon?
You mean traps where?
Yeah, that's the question. For example, at the border.
Sorry?
For example, at the border of an area where she is.
Yeah.
Does it make sense in your opinion?
Yeah, yeah, in fact, it is a complicated question. I mean, I have a long experience of trapping insects in crops. And we know where to place the traps. I mean, first we study where are the host plants, if they are attacking the fruit, so we place the traps close to the fruit, or if it behaves in the boundaries of the crop, we place the traps there. It works. I mean, for Drosophila, for example, we know exactly where to place the traps. I don't know if it is your question, but I mean, this is a big limit of trapping this.
Yeah, I think you should use a wig bait station and not a trap. Everywhere I go, I put up my wig bait station. When I'm here in the camping, I have a wig bait station to see if something is flying on it. You don't have to trap them, but then you know when she is feeding, she is always coming back to the wig bait station. It's something I learned. I'm from Flanders, Belgium, and we learned it from the people of Jersey. the island of Jersey, the wig bait stations they're using over there. So when I am going to Jersey, the first thing I do is putting up a trap at my window. They are doing it now in the Netherlands. They are doing it now in Germany because they may not trap the animals, but on the wig bait station, they just feed and then you know they are in the neighborhood. So maybe that's a good suggestion you could do.
Now people developing technologies with electronics that will photograph a hornet on a bait station and identify it as Vespa velutina and report it to a central control. So there are people trying to sell them to ports and to places of entry, and that seems to me be what you need, or that may be what governments need, because governments like to be able to control things, so they like to be able to be the first people to see things. I see things all the time, but I don't tell government. Anybody else?
Yeah, I have a comment on that. I mean, for the beekeepers, I mean, you have two types of beekeepers. Again, the professional beekeepers and the hobby beekeepers. For the hobby beekeepers, I mean, already when we try to promote a lot electric harps, so we can make electric harps, so we'll talk about that tomorrow, to 120 euros per harp. This is the price we make in France. And most of them say it is already too expensive. So I'm really against all this type of method protecting hives. We can see traps, 300 euros, this type of things. I mean, yeah, fine, it's good. I mean, monitoring is quite, yeah. But you know, let's say again, in France, when the hornet enter France, I mean, beekeepers in the area, they observe very early the hornets. And they try to inform, but nobody listens to these people. I mean, it's quite easy. As soon as you have hives, you immediately see, when you have a nest in the surrounding, you immediately see the hornets on it. And yeah, this is a sort of monitoring too. This is human visual monitoring. It works. It works very good. And even for nest detection, I mean, now, yeah, I participate with Peter to the work with radio tagging. This is very nice. This is very exciting. It works. Okay, but I mean, now we don't use it anymore. I mean, now this is only direct observation with few people which are trained to that, just walking in the evening. These are quite retired people or this type of, they are interested in that. It's quite easy to motivate them. Just walk, just observing the direction when you have a hornet running on a bee, the direction it takes. And then you go to that direction and then you screen in the trees. And we found most of the nests like that. This is quite easy, I mean. And this is citizen science. I mean, people like to do that.
So we now have an online talk by Heather Mattila. While she's connecting, I introduce her. She's professor of biological science at the Wellesley College in the USA, and she's been working a lot on communication in social insects, especially on bees. And she worked a lot also on interaction between hornets and bees, and probably some of you have seen okay, she's already there, great. Have seen the paper in which that made the front line of many journals, in which they were describing bees putting feces in front of the hive to deter the attack from hornets. So it was a very famous paper, one of her last ones. So it's a great pleasure to have Heather here. Thanks, Heather. You're already connected and ready, I guess, to start. So thanks a lot.
Yeah, great. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. All right. Thank you very much for the invitation and for having me here today. I hope that the presentation is coming through okay, and I'm going to preface it by saying for the end of your conference day, your first conference day, I'm going to tell you a story that does not have a lot of answers yet, but has way more questions than answers, but I think all of you are probably going to be comfortable with that. So yes, as was said, I am a honeybee researcher over the course of my career, and I have been interested in the behavior of honeybees, but definitely you cannot look at honeybees interacting with hornets and not become interested in the hornets themselves. So I'm going to start with a little, I guess a bit of a review of some of the work I've done with Asian honeybees, Apis cerana, and the giant hornet in Vietnam, Vespa sorer. And I do that only because it's important to lay the groundwork of what giant hornets do, to talk a little bit more about what I have been working on with Gard Otis and Chris Rosario in Guam. Okay, and I also understand that my videos are coming through beautifully, so I'll try and use them sparingly with the hope that what I do show you works well. Okay, so in Asia, I've been working with colleagues to, as Alessandro said, to understand how Apis cerana defends itself from a poorly studied hornet called Vespa sorer. And to the point where we started working on Vespa sorer, most people would have said that the only giant hornet out there was Vespa mandarinia, when in fact Vespa sorer in the south is a very similar biologically in terms of how it hunts and interacts at honeybee colonies. For instance, here is a worker right here in front of a Apis cerana colony, and I will press this video. Hopefully it plays forward a little bit for you. I'll pause it at the point where, so we've got a solitary hunter at the entrance of a honeybee colony. Now she is at the entrance alone, doing what's known as a waggle drag, kind of rubbing her last gastral segment against the surface of the hive front. And in doing so, she's depositing a pheromone that is going to bring in multiple nest mates. So in the next shot, you'll see, I'm going to freeze it here so it's not glitching too badly for you in the room, but you'll see there's multiple hornets on the front of this hive. And these hornets will attack Apis cerana. Their goal is to get in, just like Vespa mandarinia, to occupy the nest, to eliminate the adult population of defending Apis cerana, either by killing them, or really what we see often is they harass them to the point that cerana will abscond, leaving their brood defenseless, and then the hornets move in and they occupy the nest and basically feed on all of the offspring that are in there. So just like mandarinia, Vespa sorer in the south, now termed the southern giant hornet, is operating on this group hunting tactic. And so we've had multiple trips to Vietnam over the last 10 years to try and get a lot of field recordings of this interaction. And we have learned a lot. For instance, remarkably, Apis cerana collects dung from livestock around apiaries, and they will bring this dung home and smear it on the front of their entrances. You see just a couple of little dots here and there around this blue entrance, but in extreme cases, this could be a caked layer of dung around the entrances. And what that dung does is it essentially repels the Vespa sorer workers from the nest entrances through mechanisms we don't completely understand, but we do know that any entrance that has a lot of dung around it tends to have sorer workers very hesitant to approach. They don't land for very long, and they are very hesitant to try and chew their way in through the wood. We also have a lot of indication that there is some really strong signaling by Apis cerana during these attacks, both vibroacoustic signaling and chemical signaling. For instance, there is a very characteristic anti-predator pipe that they produce when giant hornets are outside. It is an alarm signal with a broadband fuzz and some structured harmonics that stops and starts abruptly, which are all characteristic signals of an alarm signal. And we've noticed too that when these workers, so for instance, this is a video freeze frame of a sorer worker at the front of a hive, with an Apis cerana worker kind of blurry because it's the dark entrance, but if you blow her up, you'll see the characteristic posture of an anti-predator piper, and she's got her Nasanov gland exposed as she's piping. And we've noticed that Apis cerana uses their Nasanov gland a lot. They use it a lot during attacks by hornets and by giant hornets in particular. For instance, this is a bee ball with Vespasaur on a wire, and you see multiple workers with their glands exposed here. So all of this to say, it's been fascinating as a behavioral ecologist who's interested in honeybees to study Apis cerana as they fight these giant hornets in Vietnam. But it's really made us very interested in the hornets as well. I've become I know this conference is about eliminating Vespa velutina, but I will say, as somebody who admires animals in general, I really do admire hornets for their predatory abilities. So we've become interested in the group hunting behavior of Vespasaur. This is a hive in Vietnam, and all of these white trails are the markers that have been left behind by gastrally rubbing against the surface of this hive front by Vespasaur. So we see a couple of points at the top where a worker was dragging her abdomen up here, and then lots of indication of pheromone being laid towards the bottom of the colony, and especially around the entrance, which is right here. And when we look at the last metasomal segment or sternite of the hornet and pull it off and look at it up close, what we see is a really elaborate gland that is hidden, just tucked under between these two sternites, and then revealed when the hornet extends her abdomen and wipes it on the front of these target nests. And in particular, this gland has got a big cetal brush in the middle with areas of pores on either side. And my lab is actively trying to work on all of the things that are secreted by these huge glands on these giant hornets. We're looking at Mandariniasaur and actually comparing it to velutina. And not just the Van der Vet gland on this last segment, we're also looking at the nearby Richards gland, the venom gland, lots of different things. So just generally interested in the communication abilities of Vespasaur as they're hunting Apis cerana. All right, so all of this work has gotten me interested in, essentially learning more about all of these invasions worldwide. And with colleagues this year, we published a review paper looking at the invasion potential of hornets. And this is one of the figures from that paper in the bottom of one of the tables that basically in orange looks at the established populations of invasive hornets around the world, with special attention for us in North America, this red arrow on Vespa mandarinia being one of great concern for us in North America. And now we're adding a velutina to the east coast of North America in Georgia, as you all know. But in the process of putting this work together and even just compiling this table and putting the references in, we had a single reference for the established invasive population of Vespa tropica in Guam. It's a 2016 reference by my co-author on this talk, Chris Rosario, who we've been working together with him over the last little while. And this is a really short publication, and it's the only thing out there about what's happening on Guam. It's a Guam new invasive species alert that's basically a one-pager PDF that describes the discovery of a nest of Vespa tropica on July 12th in 2016. 8 days later, a second nest was discovered on Guam about 15 kilometers away. And then a couple of weeks after that, another hornet was photographed about 4 kilometers from the original discovered nest. So Chris and his colleagues published this invasive species alert 2 days after that third group of hornets, or that August 8th observation. And they described their observations. They posted these sightings on iNaturalist, and then they published their PDF. And I'm pretty much that was all that was published that we could refer to for our review. And so we reached out to Chris to find out what exactly was happening on Guam, and if there was any more information that we could review in terms of the literature. He said there was none, but he did send us some videos. And I'm going to play this video. I hope it comes through for you. Even if it comes through in stutters and starts, you'll see what Gard and I saw when we first received it that really effectively made our jaw drop. This is the entrance of an Apis mellifera colony on Guam, with some hardware mesh the beekeepers put over the entrance of this Apis mellifera colony, with multiple Vespa tropica hanging out at the entrance, all trying to get in at once, a couple of them trying to pull bees through the mesh. And when we looked at more video that Chris sent us, we, after we picked our jaws up off the floor and we're kind of stunned at the scope of hornet visitation at a single colony for a species that is not widely known to be a group attacking hornet. He sent us some more videos. And for instance, this one over here on the right shows 3 individual tropica working together for a moment to try and pull this drone out of the hardware mesh, which they do successfully. There's no fighting, there's no aggression. They seem to have a high level of tolerance for each other. And then here's a couple of hornets on the left hanging out at rest underneath a hive that's got an active attack above. So other individuals are at the hive entrance, fighting with the bees, and these 3 hornets are hanging out amicably below, grooming themselves, no aggression. So very quickly, as someone who's studying giant hornets, all of this appeared to me to be very giant hornet-like, to be very group hunting-like. So after we got these, we started thinking a bit more with Chris about, Chris is an entomologist who's deeply interested in bees, but was quickly becoming more familiar with hornets through his work as a biosecurity state entomologist on Guam, and was not really aware that this was atypical behavior for hornets, for the average hornet that is a solitary hunter, for them to be acting like this. He really didn't think it was that strange. So altogether, we've been trying to get a lot more information about what's happening on Guam. So let's pause for a minute and think about what the biology of Vespa tropica is, and then what life is like possibly for these invasives on Guam. So the native distribution of tropica, this is an iNaturalist map that I took offline last week that shows the 1,300 plus sightings of Vespa tropica around its native range plus Guam. It's native to Southeast Asia and India, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Nepal, Southeast China. That's where we would find it normally. Plus we have this additional group over at the far east here in the Mariana Islands on Guam. What we know about Vespa tropica comes from some older papers, essentially. We know that it has really diverse nesting locations. It's found nesting both above and below ground. So the subterranean nests, of course, excavated or in already pre-existing holes, which is kind of what we've been seeing on Guam. Above ground, they can be out in the trees or in human structures, but they're very often in a protected area, like some kind of sheltered above ground place. They are relatively large colonies at maturity. For the few nests that have been described, they range between 2,500 and 5,000 cells at maturity, and close to 1,000 individuals, including both workers and reproductives at maturity. So these are pretty big nests that are distributed throughout the tropics, and we often do see nests from the tropics tend to be quite large. Interestingly, they are founded by single individuals, but there is a lot of evidence where it's been examined of secondary polygyny of up to 6 queens that have been seen so far. And these are some images from Banu and Huda taken in 1989 in a structure where the authors were actually living, and they documented the development of a Vespa tropica nest as the foundresses were building it. And they noticed that it was started first by a single individual, and then on day 8 she was joined by a second foundress who helped with cell construction. And then by day 11, 3 days later, a third foundress showed up, and the 3 of them worked together to envelop the nest. And then thereafter, they couldn't really see all that much about what was happening inside. So we definitely know that queens can come, or a small nest can come with company, basically. There can be more than one foundress in there. As predators, they are well known to be predators of other social wasps, and from a small number of genera, in particular from older papers, Polistes, Rhopalidia, and Stenogaster. But there are examples from the literature that have been recorded of them predating upon Apis, Apis florea, Apis mellifera in particular. Okay, so let's think about Guam for a second. Guam is a really interesting island. It's not that big, but it is the largest island in Micronesia. So a Pacific island that is about 50 kilometers long, between 6 and 19 kilometers wide. So just over 500 square kilometers in total. And it's a very warm, humid environment, tropical environment with clear, wet, and dry seasons. So this is the kind of environment where it's possible for Vespa species to have asynchronous nest founding, where there is really no clear start and end for all groups. What's happening on Guam, we don't know at this point. We don't know if tropica does have a more defined annual cycle tied to the wet and dry seasons, or if it is asynchronous like we often see for species, through Indonesia and such. From the perspective of humans on Guam, Guam is currently considered a U.S. island territory officially since 1950, but it has a long history of occupation, first by Spain, then by the U.S., then briefly by Japan through World War II, and then now back to the U.S. And because it's a large island nation, it is a major transportation hub for goods coming from mainland Asia and mainland North America. The west side of the island has a large harbor, and many of the goods that get spread throughout the islands of Micronesia go through Guam first. And also, interestingly, the U.S. Department of Defense owns 29% of the land. So the top sector of the island is off limits to citizens of Guam. It's completely managed by the military, and to the extent that what's happening with Vespa tropica in that part of the island is really a huge question mark. Nobody really knows. So this is Chris's truck as the state entomologist and biosecurity officer. The island has a long history of terrible animal invasions, plant and animal invasions, and the back of his truck has the island's hotline for pest discoveries, 475-PEST. And if you note in the numbers, there's some indication of what some of these pests are. This is Vespa tropica right here. This is the little fire ant. We've got the coconut rhinoceros beetle, feral pigs, land snails, the brown tree snake, lots of things that have ended up on Guam that never should have been there in the first place. And because it's a small island, it's been really susceptible to the effects of these invasions. Down here in this bottom right corner is a kind of a horror show calendar of the 12 currently worst invasives that the University of Guam is trying to alert the citizenry to be on the watch for. For instance, the little fire ants and the coconut rhinoceros beetles are pretty new invasives, 2011 and 2007 respectively. The little fire ant is mostly a problem because it is a human comfort issue. It's got a really terrible sting and they're hard to see. They attack pets and people. The coconut rhinoceros beetle bores into palm trees and destroys them quite quickly. It destroys their growth because they like the meristems the best. So they're a really bad invasive. Probably the most infamous invasive, not only on Guam, but it's like a worldwide ecological disaster story, is the brown tree snake, which has been officially on Guam since the 1950s, but probably was introduced during World War II through the movement of military equipment on and off the island. And the little, or the brown tree snake has extirpated almost all the reptiles and birds on the island. There are hardly any native mammals left. The only one right now is the declining population of fruit bats. And at one point, at the height of its invasion, there were 5,000 snakes per square kilometer on the island, and they've knocked that down, but it's still not anywhere under control. And it's an invasive that has dramatically altered the landscape, the natural landscape on Guam. So Guam is used to invasives, and the people who live on Guam are used to looking out for invasives. All right, so let's focus on the number 7 in the pest hotline, Vespa tropica, and think about a little bit more about this on Guam. So after seeing Chris's videos of these large number of hornets approaching and trying to get into a single colony, we had a lot of questions about what exactly is going on Guam. This is Rod Greeno, one of the beekeepers there, in a pretty typical apiary, actually a quite big apiary for Guam, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more in just a second. But some of our questions were, what exactly what do Vespa tropica attack on Guam, and how damaging are they in terms of the social or the social wasp fauna, honeybee scene, that sort of thing? What are their nests like? What can we learn from these group attacks? What exactly is going on behaviorally with these group attacks, and how giant hornet-like are they? We have definitely questions about where did these invaders originate from, and what is the level of genetic diversity on Guam? Clearly, after detection, they did not go away. So the invaders probably went through some kind of bottleneck, but like Vespa velutina, seems to have thrived nonetheless. So if we look at the species of social wasps that were already present on Guam when Vespa tropica showed up, there were 3. And the top one and the bottom one, Polistes stigma and Rhopolidia marginata, are locally called the boonie bees. Even though they're wasps, the locals call these 2 species, which if you're not an entomologist, kind of look the same. Boonie means wild in the indigenous language, and they call them bees because they call them bees. Lots of people who look at wasps call them bees. These were pretty pervasive groups of social wasps on Guam before tropica showed up, but by all accounts, and there is no data, but this is just people's observations, they have become quite uncommon on the island, probably because tropica is a social wasp specialist and has really knocked back these populations. This is a quick video on the right that shows what happens when these tropica approach these social wasp nests. They literally sit on top of them, decap sealed brood, pull out pupae, and eat them, while the resident social wasps just move to the periphery. You see some up here on, I'll pause this in case it's glitching for you, but there's some up here on the stem that this nest is on, and a couple just scattered around. They just wait for tropica to leave. So there's really no great defense. There's no defense against tropica for them. So it's at the point now on Guam where these 3 species are not easy to find anymore. So Gard and Chris spent some time together in the field last month, trying to get more videos and samples, which they send to my lab at Wellesley. Gard is now retired, so has the time and pleasure of traveling around to meet with people. And so he went to get some samples and work with Chris. And then everything comes to me at Wellesley, where we have students waiting to process data, basically. And they had a great time over several weeks. This is one of, I'm going to show you excerpts from one of the videos that they took during this period, where we have a multiple hornet attack. I won't play it for too long, just in case it's not showing up too well for you. So I'll describe what we're seeing right here. We've got multiple hornets flying around, resting on the entrance of the nest, and a couple of Apis mellifera just peeking their head out at the front here. At the start of this attack, with more individuals flying in from the hornet side. And the hornets approach the bees quite cautiously, probably because they've evolved to deal with bees like Apis cerana, which have a multitude of really great techniques to control, to try and mitigate or push back these attacks by aggressive hornets throughout Asia. So here's the same video a little bit later on, about half an hour into this attack, where we've got all of a sudden still multiple hornets flitting around. They've moved away from the entrance a little bit, partly because the bees have come out in this kind of mat of bees or a carpet of bees closer to the hornets, still not really with any kind of great defense. And then what happens if these are allowed to persist, which, most times if the beekeepers are present, they will stop them, like we understand beekeepers would. But if allowed to progress, what happens is the individuals in this group attack of the hornets start progressing to what's known as the slaughter phase. So if this is coming through for you, what you'll see is the single hornet at the front. I'll pause it right here. Coming back over and over again to grab and kill and drop, and grab and kill and drop. And what you get at the bottom of the hive is very typical for a giant hornet attack. Lots of dead bees on the ground that aren't being used for food, that are essentially just being killed, and until the point where they either abscond or they've become so weakened that the hornets can enter the nest. And this is what beekeepers have reported to Chris, and Chris is a beekeeper himself. He's seen it, that the hornets, once they get rid of the adult defenders, they'll move into the nest on their own. So this is the phylogeny of 19 of the 22 species of Vespa. I'm going to move this little thing at the bottom here because I just want to make it clear it's modified from Perard et al. Who looked at morphological and molecular data to try and resolve, to find a good phylogeny. And I've got in orange, yellow here, highlighted the tropica group. And this is a clade of hornets characterized by a specific shape of the clypeus that includes both Vespa mandarinia and Vespa sora, the two giant hornets, the northern and southern giant hornets, but also includes as close cousins Vespa ducalis and Vespa tropica. So the closest relatives to the giant hornets are in fact Vespa tropica and ducalis. Ducalis used to be called tropica throughout its range and is now considered its own subspecies. And I have to say, for us, on our end, having spent some time thinking about hornet recruitment to our Apis cerana colonies, it is interesting to see this close relationship that tropica is showing up as potentially having these multiple hornet attacks too. There are a couple of instances from the literature, both from 1982, both taken in Thailand. The first is Seeley et al., who documented a 3-day attack by only 3 Vespa tropica hornets that eventually harassed an Apis florea colony enough that the adults absconded, and then the hornets moved on to the nest and at their leisure consumed the brood. The second report, same year, also in Thailand, was for a longer attack by 24 hornets, over 24 hornets, almost 36 hornets at times, that forced an Apis mellifera colony to abscond. So in the literature, there are these scant instances of multiple hornet attacks by Vespa tropica within their range. And all the authors, both authors, describe what we saw in the videos, that the tropica grabs prey from the sidelines. They enter a phase where they have a really high kill rate, and they don't consume the adults, which for the giant hornets we would call the slaughter phase. And then they occupy the nest and prey on the brood thereafter. So from our perspective, I'm going to move this little thing again. I'm sure you can see it. Hang on. Oops, can I move it? No? There we go. From our perspective, looking at the glands of the giant hornets in comparison to not what we would call non-giant hornets, but both from the close relatives tropica and ducalis, but also the bicolor group that you see below here. The giant hornet glands are huge, basically. These are the Van der Veck glands at the top of that sternite. They have the huge sternal brush, really big areas of pores on the side, long setae in the sternal brush. When we first saw the Van der Veck glands of tropica and ducalis, we were kind of like, wow, they're just as big. those glands are just as big. And if you compare them to the glands of, say, Vespa velutina or its close relative Similema, they also have Van der Veck glands, but they're really small in comparison. They have short little setae, a very small pit area where the pheromones accumulate, and just a scattering of pores on either side. And if we zoom in to this area where the pores are located that secrete these pheromone mixtures, for our 2 giant hornets, which are, this is Sora and Mandarinia, really long hairs, lots, double the number of pores outside of this tropica group. Same with Vespa tropica, lots and lots of pores, and not only double the number, but they're twice as big in terms of diameter. And if we compare that to Vespa velutina, you get like a sprinkling of these pores adjacent to these really shallow, small sternal brushes. So everywhere we looked, Vespa had these glands, both Richards and Van der Veck gland. I'm only showing you Van der Veck, but they seem to have just way smaller glands. So it suggests to us that way less selection for communication using these glands. So if we moved into thinking a little bit about what does this mean for beekeepers on Guam, beekeeping on Guam is a pretty new thing. The bees have only been there for just over 100 years. The first colony came in 1907, and bees have been on the island long enough that there are feral colonies that have been established. But the Guam Beekeeper Association is a pretty new thing for them. That's only 10 years old at this point. So there's not been a long history on Guam of documenting or communicating about beekeeping within the island. But the Beekeepers Association now counts 114 beekeepers on Guam. Most of them have really small operations. They're usually about 4 colonies on average. The largest operation is 32 colonies, but that's really unusual for Guam. There's no one who is a commercial operator on Guam as a beekeeper. There are a few people who supplemented their COVID-reduced incomes using hive products during COVID, during the pandemic, but for the most part, not a lot of, not a large scale beekeeping area. Now, because of that pest hotline, there is a clear record of how many colony losses have been reported due to these tropica attacks. And by colony loss, I'm not differentiating between loss or kills and absconding. So they're all lumped in together here. So right after the first, they were first spotted in 2016. In 2017, there was no evidence of, or no reports of any colony losses, but those numbers have crept up. They're small, but they've crept up with some peaks here and there over the last year. And so far we're at a count of 8 so far for 2023. Beekeepers are mostly maintaining, they're noticing that the tropica is attacking the weakest colonies, and that beekeepers are very mindful of these attacks, and they are trying to protect their colonies by putting this hardware mesh on the front to let the bees out and keep the hornets away. There's virtually no research that's been done on how the mesh affects the foraging traffic of the bees. It's probably impactful. One of the biggest challenges that they've had is the propensity of beekeepers on Guam to use styrofoam hives, because wood rots really easily in this tropical climate. So they prefer styrofoam because it holds up in the weather better, the humid weather. But tropica is great at chewing through the styrofoam. For instance, this is one hive that had the entrance. Once the entrance got hardware meshed up, the hornets started digging in from the bottom, and eventually were able to get into this colony and force and abscond pretty rapidly by coming in through the bottom. So beekeepers are grappling with equipment problems, essentially. So we have questions about where these hornets originated from. And if you look on iNaturalist at all of the pictures that have been uploaded, and previous literature describes this too, there's a pretty big range of color forms that are found throughout the native habitat. And for instance, the biggest extreme would be the all black tropica that are found in the Philippines versus the very colorful tropica that are found in India. And Hong Kong images tend to look a lot like the Indian images as well. They have red heads, red markings on their body, a strong orange stripe on their gaster. And this is in contrast to the hornets that you see pictured throughout Indonesia, in Singapore, in the Southeast China, that tend to have black faces. They have the stripe that the Philippines lacks, but overall their body is much blacker. And other things that people look at in these color forms are wing shading and coloration on different kinds of coloration on the thorax. In Vietnam and in Thailand, if you look at the images from iNaturalist in that kind of central part of Southeast Asia, and I've seen this myself in Vietnam, for instance, I took these 2 pictures across 10 years. This is a group of tropica hanging out pretty amicably on a hive in a beekeeping yard in Vietnam, and they're a mix of black-faced and red-faced hornets. And I just took this one last month. I was just back from Vietnam, and this is a red-faced hornet there. So whether or not this is helpful for us, looking at the hornets on Guam, we have samples that show a mix of both red-faced and black-faced hornets. These are two that I pulled out of vials last week to take an image for this talk. So I apologize for the flash photography of it. These are not the best shots, but they do clearly show a mix of coloration on the hornets from a sample that is only from 6 different apiaries too. So we've sent legs from these samples for the small number of hornets we have so far from Guam to Junichi Takahashi in Japan, and he's going to do some work with the samples that we're collecting to try and get a sense of where these hornets are coming from, where the founding population is from. And we've done a little bit of work with microsats in my lab just to get a sense of, so far with the 42 specimens we have, which Chris collected from beekeepers as they killed things in their apiaries. They are very, very cooperative, popping them into alcohol and giving them to Chris, and Chris eventually sent them to us from 6 different attacks. We can see that they're from the 6 loci that amplified well for us. We had some problems with these 2. That doesn't mean they don't work. They just overlap too much for us to really see what was happening. We don't get a sense that there is a lot of diversity in this first set of alleles that we've looked at, which we would like to increase the number of microsats that we're looking at once we get more samples from Chris, which are on the way. But so far, the number of alleles for these 6 microsats indicate, all of having 3 alleles could be explained by a single gene or a single founderess being introduced to the island. So far, the level of diversity that we've detected is really, really low, but obviously we're in early days on all of this. And Chris is getting these samples from across the island. This part of the island down here is kind of hard to access because it's quite hilly. And the top part of the island is the military base, but we're getting some pretty good coverage from the center part of the island. They're discovering nests all over the place in Guam, just like we would expect from the mainland. This is a lid from an underground container that was buried that the hornets found and made a nest in. This is a nest being cut out from the wall of a home. This is a nest half above ground, half below ground, and an aerial nest as well in a pretty protected bamboo stand. So lots of diversity in nest location, just like we expect from what we see on the mainland too. And so we're at the point where we're trying to get a better sense of how big these nests are. We really lack information on, like I said, the annual cycle, whether it's asynchronous or if it's following, if there's a low period in the year where we would expect giants to be restarting collectively. But we have done a little bit of work sending samples to Chris Looney at the USDA, where they're going to get a sense of what exactly the hornets are eating by doing some DNA barcoding of the feces in the larval cells. Yeah, so lots of stuff in the works. And I'll end here with a very pretty picture of Vespa tropica. Perhaps I'm trying to distract you from the fact that all we have to do next is more of everything. We need more samples, we need to collect more nests, we need more videos of these group attacks, and we need a better sense, a more fine-grained analysis of when beekeepers are noticing attacks on their colonies, if there's any kind of annularity to the cycle of tropica on Guam and this tropical island. So I will say thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me to speak at your hornet. This is my very first hornet conference. I am always in behavior or bee conferences, so it's a pleasure to be invited to a room, even virtually, with everyone talking hornets. It's been interesting to listen in so far. Big thanks to Gard and Chris for all their cooperation trying to wrangle these samples off of Guam and into a lab. And thank you to my lab students who have been really excited about dealing with these new samples. And of course, a huge amount of collaboration from the beekeepers on Guam. And I'll end there. I think I need to pop back over and stop sharing, I think. Yeah, there we go. Oh, there's my head. It's so funny. I can see my big face on the screen. Hi, everyone.
Thank you very much, Heather. It's really fascinating. I now would love to come to Guam and see what's happening. Questions from the audience or from online, from remote?
Hey, thanks a lot. I will shift from crustaceans to hornet now. And what about the predators, natural predators of this species? Because I guess in Guam there are not so many birds because of the brown tree snakes. So if you can tell us a little bit more about this, thank you very much.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we don't have a sense that there is anything on Guam that predates upon Vespa tropica. And truly in for giant, not that I'm calling these giant hornets, because there's a lot to be determined about how closely they align with some of the biology of giant hornets, but most people would view giant hornets as apex predators, with the only real predator being humans. So whether or not that's the case for tropica on Guam remains to be seen. I think we need a lot more information, but we do know that the humans are hunting them, definitely. The beekeepers and everyone is concerned about having this large stinging species on the island. So right now, that's what we know, that humans are the ones that are finding them and killing them. It's as far as our information extends.
Okay, Federico. Okay, thank you for the great talk. I have a question about the slaughter phase. Have you ever documented, or do you have any report of the slaughter phase in the native range on Apis cerana? Because you said that they perform the slaughter phase on Apis mellifera, which is not co-evolved with the Vespa tropica, or on the dwarf bees that they have like the open comb. But it would be interesting to see if they also try this strategy or this technique with the Apis cerana, which has so many behavioral defenses against the hornets.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. And I would love to have more information about that. I hope all my answers are, we need more information, but that's really where we're at. The only two published accounts are on mellifera and on Apis florea. And Apis mellifera, definitely the authors described a very clear slaughter phase with a really high kill rate, but that is not against Apis cerana. So there is currently no documentation about how tropica interacts with cerana. I can tell you in Vietnam, having seen tropica and having spent a lot of time in cerana apiaries, we see Vespa tropica, and it's very often a single individual. That one picture I took of the three together, I did not see them hunting together, but I noted that they were hanging out. And that's the closest I personally have gotten, or anyone that I've talked to when it comes to Apis cerana.
It is very, very fascinating. I mean, that they see the inside of the colony, the brood as the resource, and not the individuals that are bred, by velutina and the hornets. So it is amazing, this behavior, really. Thank you.
I agree. Thanks.
Anybody else? I had a quick one. Actually, you already partially answered it. About the social perception of people. You told us that they're hunting them. So in general, there's a great awareness in the island about the species. What can you tell us?
Yeah. They are well known as the greater banded hornet on Guam. If you look up news items, they're in the newspaper constantly. There's a lot of talk amongst the public about them. They're very aware of them. For instance, when GARD came to the island, they had him on a radio show, and it's like a morning talk radio show, just to learn more about hornets and bees, because people are really interested and keyed into what is happening to the natural landscape on Guam. It's a highly disturbed island, and most people feel the discomfort of these invasives. For instance, the brown tree snake has caused 1,600 power outages in the last 20 years on Guam, and it costs about $5 million a year to the electrical system to repair the damage of this one invasive snake. So people's daily lives are affected by tropica. And 2 of the 3 early samples that I reported by Chris in that news alert were found near swimming pools in tourist resort areas. So there's a lot of interaction, and I would say my understanding of it is a high level of engagement, both through the media and through social circles. Guard's impression was that everyone on that island knows Chris because he is the biosecurity officer and deals with a lot of these invasive insects.
Thanks. From what you say, I get that the media are doing quite well. They're reporting the news, the information in a proper way. That's a question, because in Italy, for example, it's not exactly that way. Usually we have like half of the news which are wrong or with the wrong picture or whatever. So it's a different story in your place. Not your place, I mean in Guam.
In Guam, yes. Yeah, it's impressive, actually. They don't have a lot of resources to do things about it. I think that's a frustration that they have. The scale of problem for invasives in general is really enormous on Guam. And so this is just another on a long list of unfortunate stories for them.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else? Okay, thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.